first ever Orangebloods pregame show. I'm Geoff Ketchum. Today, this whole enterprise brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. They're our sponsor of the postgame show. They've stepped in big as it relates to the pregame show as well. Again, it's the first ever Orangebloods Texas OU pregame show. We always do the postgame shows. You guys know that. We've been doing it for years. But on such a big stage, with game day there, we thought we would bring you game day, our version of it, without commercials, nonstop conversation for the next 3 hours involving Texas and Oklahoma. Let me give you an idea of what we've got hooked up for the next 3 hours. What up, Carrie? First one. You're literally the first one in the chat. This will also be the most interactive pregame show, I would think, just about anywhere. We'll be taking your comments, your questions. We'll be doing a little bit of everything over the course of the next 3 hours. This hour, we're going to start things off with a conversation. Bottom of this hour at 8:30, Josh McQuistion from Soonerscoop.com will join us. We'll get the Oklahoma side of things and, you know, the lead up to the biggest game of this season, potentially until these two teams maybe meet again in December in the Metroplex for a second time. It would be funny if right before Texas and Oklahoma leave the Big 12, we find ourselves in a situation where these two teams are playing each other in the Big 12 championship game. It would feel like the thing the conference was always meant to be, and yet it hasn't happened nearly enough. At least if you're Oklahoma, you're saying, hey, it hadn't been our fault. We've been here as it relates to Texas. Can they get to a point where they put themselves into a position to get into this game? Look, that's what today is all about. The stakes are huge. Mike Farrell will join us from Rivals.com also in this hour. That's the plan. 9:15, Jason Sukamel joins the show. We'll do some stuff with Ari Temkin. We've got Anwar Richardson joining us live from the Cotton Bowl. Once he gets there, he will join the show. Former All-American Lance Gunn will join the show as well. I did a recorded interview with him yesterday where I was amazed that the former three-time All-Southwest Conference player and former All-American, and for those of you that don't know this, Lance Gunn, the very first guy from Galena Park, North Shore to sign with Texas. I think he told me yesterday that he was the first player drafted from North Shore as well. So, you know, when we think about Corey Redding and all of the guys that have come through North Shore over the years, Lance Gunn is the guy that started us off. He'll join us later in the show. Like I said, I recorded an interview with him yesterday. It's good to be with you guys. We're going to have a lot of fun. I used to do 3 hours of radio 5 days a week. I've missed it a little bit. So we're going to do 3 hours of Texas OU pregame, and let's just set the stage. By the way, like I said, Josh McQuistion is going to join us in about 30 minutes. If you want to get your questions in, I want to try to make time throughout the show today, all 3 hours, to make sure that we're interactive, to make sure that we are answering your questions, involving you, the viewer, the guy, those of you who are investing your time. I'm already seeing questions in the chat that I won't be putting on. No, I will not be doing shotgunning beers with Taylor and Chip or whatever else. Not exactly sure what's going on with that crew. We're just going to focus on what we do, which is to try to provide the most interactive and informative Texas OU pregame show there is. Let's start with the most obvious thing on the outset of today's pregame show. And again, I'm Geoff Ketchum from Orangebloods.com. An entire cast and crew will be joining us over the course of the next 3 hours. This is an incredibly historic moment in the history of the rivalry in a lot of different ways. I don't think that we can completely appreciate the fact that Casey Thompson, son of former Oklahoma star quarterback Charles Thompson, is quarterbacking in this game. It would be a huge deal if Casey Thompson were starting this game on the Oklahoma side of things. Think about it. One of the things that these two schools have never had is really that kind of a legacy. I mean, for all of the James Street produces Houston Street, he goes on to be an All-American pitcher and obviously a longtime Major League pitcher for the Longhorns. It's not the same thing as being a quarterback and then producing the air with your name that emerges as the kind of big-time prospect that's capable of starting for one of these two teams. Casey Thompson starting for Texas today is one of the most unique storylines in the history of this rivalry. I mentioned it on the Orangebloods YouTube channel earlier this week. This doesn't happen. This just doesn't happen. I've never watched an Iron Bowl where you've got, a guy starting at Alabama who was a legend at Auburn or vice versa. It's like, oh, remember when Joe Namath had that son and he started for Auburn? It doesn't happen. You think about Ohio State and Michigan, same thing. Same thing. There's never been a moment where you looked at Michigan and said, oh, look, there's Kirk Herbstreit's kid. Not that he's necessarily a legend of the school, but I'm trying to think of Ohio State quarterbacks from the 80s and 90s. None are completely jumping off. There's going to be an obvious one that I'm missing. But let's just say Kirk Herbstreit. You've never seen Herbie's kid start at quarterback for Michigan. This is so unique. The national media can't talk about this enough in terms of what this is. And the thing is, I don't even think that Oklahoma fans can completely appreciate what it is that's taking place today because they've owned this rivalry for so long that they've kind of forgotten what it's like to not have scoreboard. I mean, even in 2018, the Longhorns win that game, and then Oklahoma comes back in December and wins the Big 12 championship. It lessened everything that happened that day. It's the one thing that ends today that we all won't know. Are these two teams going to play again later in the year? Because if that's the case, today's the warm-up act, even though we'll treat it like it's a borderline Super Bowl. I'll get back to Casey Thompson in a second. From a Longhorns side of things, what's attainable for them? If, by the way, I won't be doing a lot of this today. My man Shell pops in, and he's like dropping recruiting prospects on me. Hey, check out this kid at Yates. Thank you, Shell. Shell Walker jumping in and letting us know that there are young recruits, Cam Beiser out of Yates High School, that we need to check out. I will make a mental note of that, Shell. Thank you very much. What's on the line for the Longhorns today is so big. So big. And when you talk about momentum and just momentum and recruiting is the thing that we spend so much time talking about, right? I mean, it's impossible to have a conversation about Texas OU on orangebloods.com when you consider, without recruiting, when you consider how much we talk about recruiting. But, when you start with what happens on the field, a win today for the winner of this game, I don't want to say puts them 1 foot into the Big 12 championship game, but it kind of does. If you're the Longhorns, you beat Oklahoma today. The thing that this game ultimately gives the winner is that in a world where no one runs the table, and this might be that kind of a year. Again, I don't even know what we're looking at from an Oklahoma side of things because they're undefeated and ranked 4th in the country, and they feel like a team that could have multiple Big 12 losses this year. But the team that wins today emerges with a big 0 in the loss column. From my perspective, neither team's running the table the rest of the way. The Longhorns have a tricky schedule that even over the course of the next month has them at home against an Oklahoma State team that's got 2 weeks to prepare. So while Texas and Oklahoma play their blood match today, Oklahoma State is sitting back. They're watching. They're getting a little bit more tape on Casey Thompson and trying to figure out where his tendencies and his trends go. And they're rested and they're getting ready and they can pour a lot into it. And then the week after that, which is technically 2 weeks, Texas, with their own week of rest, to be fair, they'll go to Waco and play a Baylor team that, like Oklahoma State, gets 2 weeks to prepare. rare in a Texas season that I can think of where Texas will have played back-to-back games where the opponent has had 2 weeks to get ready for that game. Once that little 2-game stretch is done, then they go on the road and they take on an Iowa State team in Ames. That game before the season had been circled all year long as maybe the game that decides between those two teams who gets into the Big 12 championship game. So for the Longhorns, this is game number 2 of a 5-game stretch that will define this season. Because once you get beyond that Iowa State game, even though there's a road trip to Morgantown kind of buried inside of that, you get both of the Kansas schools. It feels like a little bit of a let-off. The next 5 games, which this is the second of those 5 games, the first being in Fort Worth, because that 5-game stretch, 4 games that Texas will play away from DKR. In Fort Worth, in Dallas, then they get their home game against Oklahoma State. Then they are on the road in Waco and then in Ames. So there's a 5-game stretch that I don't know that we've completely talked enough about. That may not be the murderer's row that Texas played back in 2008 when they go on, they play Oklahoma and then there's Missouri and then there's Oklahoma State. And it felt like that. And obviously it ended in Lubbock where the Longhorns almost went over the entire mountain and didn't quite get there. This doesn't have the firepower of that stretch in 2008, but a 5-game stretch where you're on the road, truly 3 of those games are road games, one of them in Dallas today, but 4 out of 5 games in that stretch against teams that are very dangerous. TCU, whatever they are, for Texas, that team is dangerous. And the Longhorns take care of the Horned Frogs a week ago in fairly, I don't want to say dominant fashion. It should have been. It's the thing about that team last week is it won in Fort Worth, and I didn't think they played particularly well. Does that mean that Texas isn't playing its best brand? They played 2 games away from home this season, in Fayetteville and then in Fort Worth. And I would say that those are the 2 worst performances that the Longhorns have had all season. So when you talk about a 5-game stretch where 4 games are away from home, away from DKR, where Texas has been awesome, just awesome at home this season. I mean, you wonder if it would be interesting to see. I don't want to go too far on a tangent here, but I'm curious to see how well Texas plays the remainder of the season at DKR. Obviously, that starts next week against Oklahoma State. They've been so good at home and such a uneven team on the road. I don't think anybody still knows what the hell that was in Fayetteville a few weeks ago. That game, less than a month ago, it feels like a lifetime ago. I mean, even Steve Sarkisian earlier this week thanked the media for I got to stop reading the comments section while I'm in the middle of when I'm going solo. I can only read the comments section so much. It's true. By 4 p.m., Orangebloods will either be joyful drunk or angry drunk. Either way, I predict multiple people will be banned. Banned? Yes. Multiple people, in all likelihood, in a Texas loss on Orangebloods will be banned. Again, thanks to the Loewy Law Firm. You can see it right above me here in the name title of the sponsor of today's pregame show. Josh McCuistion, Soonerscoop.com will join me in about 15 minutes. I'm flying solo here at the very beginning of the show, but it's I didn't care. I said out loud this week, what sounds like too much? 3 hours? Let's do 3 hours. By the way, we have predictions coming in. 38-35. Texas. Feels like it might be that kind of game. I am picking Oklahoma to win today. I feel like I don't want to, we put it on Orangebloods, so my prediction's already out there. We have the prediction video on the Orangebloods Texas football channel. By the way, I know I'm like Inception, and I've done like 3 layers inside this conversation, and then at some point I have to circle back out and go back to all of the other things that I was talking about. I haven't forgotten. I will make sure that I go back and finish the Charles Thompson, Casey Thompson thought. We'll go back to what this means for Texas and Oklahoma. Just want to remind everybody, Josh McCuistion will join us in about 15 minutes. So let me go back to those things. Look at that. Benny Rogers is like, to the bottom of the mod rankings, go Catch. I'm doing 3 hours of a pregame show without commercials. There will be an occasional break when we play like Lance Gunn's interview, but I'm going to be 3 hours mostly by myself. Although, yeah, the guests will start coming in. Like I said, Anwar Richardson joins us in the next hour. Jason Sukumel joins us in the next hour. Don't let me woe is me you the entire way. But I'm just saying, should I really go down in the mod rankings if I'm signing up for a 3 hour pregame show where most of it I'm doing it alone? No, I'm just saying, cut me some slack. At least keep me above Sukumel. Can't let me fall below Sukumel in the mod rankings. Okay, let me reset. I want to go back to the very beginning, though, about the Casey Thompson component of this game. You know, we could do 3 hours of just quarterback discussion, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, the Casey Thompson component of this game is absolutely fascinating from a historical perspective. But there's this thing that's going on at the quarterback position at Texas where you know for the long-term future that Arch Manning is the guy that Steve Sarkisian would love to build this program around long-term. I mean, Casey Thompson in all likelihood has the next 2 years. It's hard for me to think that Casey would play all of the years remaining that he has left. But, you know, going into this year with what he had to work with, the feeling was that either he or Hudson Card, whoever the starter would be, starts this year, comes back next year with a ton of hype, plays that second or third big season, and then they bolt. And then you hand the program off to either a Malik Murphy or even an Arch Manning at that point. Potentially. It's hard to think necessarily that you'd want Arch Manning to start as a true freshman, but you could see where the handoff was starting to go. That Casey Thompson has won the Texas quarterback job makes for a really interesting conversation in the sense that this isn't the way that it was supposed to go. This today was supposed to be a coronation day of sorts for Hudson Card. No, when I say it's what was supposed to happen, I say that in the sense that that's what everybody going, I think, in the program thought this season was going to be. It was going to be the load-up season for Hudson Card. Casey Thompson has taken that. This is now the load-up season for Casey Thompson. And it's games like this that will either lock that statement up, that this is ultimately Casey Thompson's program for the next couple of years, if you will. The same way when it was Colt McCoy, that was his team, his program. With all due respect to Mac Brown and everybody else, like, you get defined by who your quarterback play is. This is the type of game that has a chance to be exactly what this game was for James Brown. Almost not quite 30 years ago, but when you go back to think about the 1994 Longhorns, we all remember James Brown, 3-time conference championship winner, last Southwest Conference, first Big 12. Tried to get a hold of him for today's pregame show, and JB has just become a difficult dude to get a hold of, for the record. If anybody sees James Brown this weekend, let him know that I'm looking for him and would love to chat. James beats Oklahoma in a still historically memorable game. I mean, it's weird to think that that game's 27 years old, and yet I think there's still a feeling that those plays, the Stoney Clark tackle and the James Brown plays, like those things live on. It was the advantage that James Brown had in the battle with Shea Morenz. It was like, that guy beat Oklahoma. And I think that's what's on the line for Casey Thompson today. It is, he has gotten off to a historically good start, right? So you're talking about a guy that up until last week's game was playing at a efficiency level greater than Kyler Murray, greater than Baker Mayfield. Hits a little bit of a thing against TCU so that his season numbers aren't quite that lofty, although Casey Thompson enters this game ranked number 1 in the Big 12 in passing efficiency with 180 quarterback rating. That is the best in the – if he maintains that, it's the best efficiency rating in the history of the Texas program. Better than Colt McCoy in 2008. That's what Casey Thompson has been playing. But games like today really define you more than stats. And what Casey Thompson has, I think, an opportunity to do today is if they win, it's hard to see a path for Hudson Card to ever take this thing back from Casey Thompson. And some people would tell you that that's already happened, that Casey Thompson is in there. And look, I'm somewhat there in the sense that Casey Thompson looks like a guy that is going to start for the rest of this season, barring an injury. So Hudson Card is sitting on the sidelines. By the way, Josh McCuistion from Sooner Scoop is going to join us in about 8 minutes. We'll get the Oklahoma side of things here on the Orangebloods pregame show, brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. Casey statistically is performing at a level that it's hard to see Hudson in practice next offseason being so good that it's enough to trump the guy that literally, whatever this team does is whatever it does, but they do it right now with Casey Thompson. Today's the kind of day that can emphatically change, I think, the quarterback position in terms of finality, in terms of long-term thinking. I don't want to say that Hudson Card becomes a bit of an afterthought, but if Casey Thompson wins today, beats Oklahoma, beats his dad's team, and then suddenly has the Longhorns undefeated in the Big 12 standings, post-OU, heading towards another nationally significant game next week against Oklahoma State, Hudson Card is, I think, maybe it's not checkmate, but it could be check. And it's funny. Little Birdie told me this week with regards to the Hudson Card backstory now to what's taking place on the field this year, that they absolutely noticed, that it was noticed last week that when Casey Thompson had a dreadful first half, we can call it dreadful, right? It was a statistically worse first half than Hudson Card had against Arkansas a few weeks ago. I said on Monday, there's no way Hudson Card and his family and his camp would have seen that happen and noticed that, unlike with Hudson Card, Casey Thompson didn't get pulled. That there was never a moment in that game where it felt like they were going to go away from Casey Thompson. We'll see what it means long term, but today really does have a chance to mean, I think, that Casey Thompson, this becomes his football program that's on the line. If Casey Thompson doesn't play well, that, there's a conversation to be had about what happened last week at TCU. The passing offense was not good. And if Jordan Whittington doesn't, I don't want to say bail out Casey Thompson, that feels harsh. But, Casey Thompson, the ball that Jordan Whittington catches for the first, what was like a 31-yard reception, it's really the big first passing play of significance that the Longhorns had during that entire game last week in the fourth quarter. He catches that ball, and then later in the quarter, he has the long catch and run for a touchdown. Those were really the two plays in the passing game. And it's easy to remember that Xavier Worthy dropped a few passes, 3 passes last week in the first 3 quarters of that game. It's easy to look at that and go, well, how different would Casey's numbers have been if you add those drop plays in there? Still, the rest of the passing game, outside of the Xavier Worthy drops last week, it wasn't good either. And this game takes on Jim Smith saying in our comments right now the team won. The team absolutely won. And it was one of those things that made you, I think, feel good about this Texas team, that they could go on the road in Fort Worth, have a stinker at the quarterback position, and it not matter. But I think, my feeling on that performance is it was just one of those days that you go on the road, things weren't quite clicking, because it didn't ever feel like one guy was playing poorly. It just felt like they never quite were coming together at any point. I look at that as a little bit of a one-off. My expectations are that Casey Thompson is going to play really well today. Those are my expectations. But, if we're being if I'm an Oklahoma fan, or if I am someone who's covering the Sooners, or if I'm a national media member, it's within your right to wonder who is Casey Thompson more like? Is he more like the guy that was playing at a nationally elite level against Rice, against Texas Tech? What do those performances mean? Or is he more like the guy against TCU? Which those are radically, drastically different things. I think he's more like the nationally elite guy. My expectations coming into this season were that no matter who started between Casey Thompson and Hudson Card, I thought under Steve Sarkisian that we would be talking about a quarterback this year at Texas that performed better than Sam Ehlinger did a year ago. And I think both of them, Hudson Card, meltdown in Fayetteville or not, I think even if he was playing right now, statistically you would have a quarterback. Because that's the thing. If Hudson had been playing right now, he puts up big numbers against Rice. He puts up big numbers against Texas Tech. It's hard to say what happens in that TCU game. But, I think that you're talking about a passing game at Texas it's elevating as we speak. So I think last week's performance by Casey Thompson's a bit of an anomaly. I think he plays well today. I think Casey Thompson probably throws multiple touchdowns. I think the question at the quarterback position, and it is maybe the question that I want to ask Josh McCuistion from Soonerscoop.com when he joins us here on the Orangebloods pregame show next 5 minutes or so. When we look at this quarterback battle, if this game comes down to the quarterback that blinks first, or because I think Casey plays well, but if you ask me, is there a turnover in Casey? Yeah. Casey Thompson probably turns the ball over today. But I think we're probably looking at a quarterback in Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma that he's got an interception in him as well. I think both of these quarterbacks have interceptions inside of them today. Who of these two guys is most likely to throw two? Because if you tell me today, before the game starts, that Casey Thompson throws a couple of picks, that really concerns me as someone covering this Texas team. And yet, if you tell me that it's Spencer Rattler, who's the guy that when this game ends has multiple interceptions, then yeah, I think that Texas is well on their way to getting some wins. While we wait for Josh McCuistion, I'll take some questions here. Get a little interactive. Carson asked, do I think that we'll see more of Keelan Robinson today? Yeah, man. I think there are a couple of things that I'm expecting to see more of from Texas. Number one, I'm expecting to see more passes out of the backfield to the running back position just in general. It wasn't that long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, when I think Bijan Robinson had 5 catches in a game. Was it against Louisiana? And he's only got 10 on the season. So Bijan Robinson is averaging 2 receptions per game. That would be 5 for me today. If I'm Steve Sarkisian, I'm finding a way to get Bijan Robinson in space. In one-on-one situations, a chance to get to that second level. And I think that – sorry, I'm sitting here. I just got a note from my producer. Hey, Josh McQuistion is right there. Blake, to answer your question, Josh McQuistion, once you let him in, will join us here from Soonerscoop.com to talk a little Texas OU. There he is. What's up, you handsome devil? You combed your hair and everything.
Yeah, I am one of those rare ones that I cannot do anything in the morning before I am cleaned and shaved, and it doesn't work for me.
The hair is very much like a Ricky Gervais look going on. You look great today. Sooner Scoop's Josh McQuistion, clearly someone that I have a crush on, joining the show to talk a little Texas OU. Josh, the quarterback battles where I want to start with us today, because I think both of these guys have multiple touchdown passes in them today. The question is, of the two, is there one most likely to have a 2-turnover day? Is there somebody that in the pressure of the moment blinks a little bit? If you'll remember, when Texas last won this game, Kyler Murray blinked for like 2 drives, and it ended up being like the difference in the game. They play in the rematch, and Kyler doesn't blink at all. I wonder if today is the kind of game where if a guy has a bad quarter, it's the thing that separates these two teams on the field today.
I could absolutely see it coming down to something like that, because this feels tight. I mean, like, there are years in the past where we've talked, Ketch, and you could see, Oklahoma's the favorite here, or, dating back a little farther, Texas is the favorite here. But there weren't a lot of options where you saw the underdog winning. This one, it's tight. It's close. I can see one play or a couple of drives being the difference in this thing. And prior to the TCU game, I would have said it was Spencer Rattler, just because he has that propensity to be overly aggressive. He gets a little confident in his arm. You brought up Kyler Murray. He'll make some Kyler Murray throws where Kyler Murray can get away with those. I'm not quite sure you can get away with those sometimes. And I think sometimes he doesn't recognize that. But TCU had Casey Thompson a couple of times last week where they should have made a play and didn't do it. So I don't know. I don't know if TCU saw something or if Casey Thompson just had an off day. I'm inclined to believe it's probably just him having an off day. I feel like Rattler is the boom or bust guy in this situation. I feel like you know what you're going to get out of Casey Thompson pretty much. Rattler could have a huge day where, he has all that skill, all that talent. He could go crazy, or he could be the guy that gets benched again. I don't think either is out of the realm of possibility. Now, I will say, for all the hits he's taken, he's like 38 for his last 41. He's thrown well over the last 5 or 6 quarters, but there's been plenty of moments this season where he has not been that guy.
Josh, is it that he hasn't been that guy, or is it that he's just not Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, or Jalen Hurts?
There's some of that for sure. There is this expectation. He came into the season, and Ketch, I would talk to people about this all summer, and I think you and I even talked about it a couple of times. There was this feeling like he had already done it. He's there. He's to that level. And I thought, man, I've seen good things, and you can see, even in, the West Virginia game, which is probably the low point, even compared to Texas last year, the West Virginia game this year was probably the low point of his career with the booing and the chants and everything else. He made some throws in there that you're just like, wow, that dude can do some stuff that's not normal. But it's the consistency. That's what made Baker and Kyler so special. Sure, they're great players, and that's fine. But it was when they dropped back to pass, you had a sensation, well, that's going to be a completion. It was just where's this ball going to go? With Spencer Rattler, you're like, he's not going to throw into that coverage, is he? It's just a different sensation that you have. And I think the level of expectation is part of it. It's a lot to where when you really haven't done much, you had a weird year last year. We're learning that 2020 is a weird season to take at full volume. But again, Spencer, I think there is a lot there, and I think he's starting to figure it out. But at a stage like this, you just don't know what you're going to get out of guys until it happens.
when we look at Spencer Rattler, this OU team in general, I've been saying for a couple of weeks, I don't care how they play in September. I've seen this OU is vulnerable in September show a lot. I mean, because it goes back to the Bob Stoops years where they would look shaky in a game and Texas would go, oh, we got them this year. And then by the time they get to October, it's just not the same team. So last week, I found myself pretty damn impressed by Oklahoma. I didn't watch the first half, full transparency. Yeah. So I finished up the postgame show, and I start watching in the third quarter, and suddenly I'm watching the running game get a little good. Suddenly it's like, hey, there's the Kennedy Brooks I know. And it's like, hey, that's the Eric Gray that I thought we were going to see when he transferred from Tennessee. And then I look up, and it's like Spencer Rattler's not – there are no incomplete passes. Like, he's just completing everything. Suddenly it's a 34-17 game, 10 minutes to go in the third quarter. And I was like, there it is. Oklahoma may not have flipped the switch, but they flipped a switch. And that's a little more like the performance that I would expect from them coming into Texas. Then the game gets a little close. And so I guess from Oklahoma's perspective, is this team turning the switch on, or is this team vulnerable, or is it both?
I think I would honestly say I think there is some vulnerability. I really do. I think the run game will tell us a lot today because I think Oklahoma caught Kansas State a little off guard. They switched up to some zone schemes. They did a little bit. They were a little bit different up front than anything they had shown, and really traditionally what OU has done under Lincoln Riley and Bill Bedenbaugh. They're a gap scheme. They're going to block things differently. And I thought they've got some young offensive linemen, some guys that are you could just tell in early weeks were not fully aware of where they should be, what they were doing. And I think Oklahoma just said, we can't execute what we want to do. We're going to simplify this. We're going to knock this down a little bit. Texas won't get caught off guard with that. They've seen it. They know what's coming. They can adjust. So I do think there is some vulnerability. This team has some issues. They've got problems at the second level on defense. At linebacker is one of the positions coming in. I can say, I had questions about Spencer Rattler. I thought the linebacker group was going to be great, and they've got some problems. They're busting in coverages. They're having problems with their zone. They're getting killed with crossers. It's why everybody's running motion at Oklahoma's defense. And I tried to explain to people this week, I was like, Texas runs motion all the time. This isn't like something they're going to put in for OU. This is what they do. It's part of their foundation. So this is, like I said, you've seen, some teams kind of sprinkle it in just to give Oklahoma those looks and see how they would react. Texas is just at home doing what they do. So that's going to be interesting to see if OU can finally start to grasp that, because the motion's just been an issue. And then they run these crossers behind and in front. It's been a huge problem. The offensive line, there's talent there. I mean, Oklahoma's recruited too well to say, they don't have guys. But Wanya Morris hasn't come on, the Tennessee transfer, like everybody thought he might. He's fighting for snaps at left tackle with Anton Harrison, who's probably Oklahoma's most talented lineman. But he's been benched in the last two games at various points in the game. So clearly they're not getting what they want out of him. So I think there's vulnerability. At the same time, you got Spencer Rattler, you got Marvin Mims, you got Jaden Hayes. I mean, they've got all these tremendously talented players, and the defensive line is as good as it's been at OU in almost 15 years, in my opinion. I think that 2009 group with Gerald McCoy and Jeremy Beal and some of those guys, that was a better unit, but not by a lot. And the depth they run out of the defensive line is impressive. So there's parts I really like, but there are huge concerns as well to me.
Josh McQuestion from Soonerscoop.com joining us here on the Orangebloods pregame show, brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. Hey, go find Josh on Twitter at Josh_Scoop. A couple more questions, Josh, and I'll let you go. Number one, the offensive line. I know you're a big line guy. Whenever we do our offseason conversations, we can get lost in talking about the line plays. You already kind of gave the synopsis of where Oklahoma stands. It's the scary thing, I think, on the Texas side is they were so overwhelmed against Arkansas. They've been so inconsistent all season, but they've showed promise. They played pretty well last week.
Mm-hmm.
They played pretty well the week before against Texas Tech. But there's a red blinking sign over Christian Jones that seems to be screaming trouble. It feels like Nick Benito's a guy that's been good in this game already. I think he's got 3.5 career sacks or 3 sacks, but he gets them. And it would be a shock for me if he comes away from this game without a sack today. It would be – the question is it a game-changing sack? Is he a guy that wins this game because of a huge defensive play, or can Texas survive him getting his? Because it's just hard for me to imagine that matchup goes all day without a hiccup at some point for Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I watch Texas's offensive line, they've got pieces I like. I've been a Jake Majors fan since he was in high school. I think he's going to be an outstanding player. They've got, I've always liked the right guard whose name's going to escape me, the Angelo.
Junior Angelau?
Yeah, I like him a lot. I'm sorry for butchering his name. That's not the strength of my game. But yeah, Christian Jones, and it's funny because it's the opposite of Oklahoma's reality. Their pass pro's been pretty good for Oklahoma. Run blocking's been an issue. Texas, I watch them run block, and they're hitting their assignments. They're doing the things they need to do. They're big. They're physical. I mean, they want to play that game, and it plays perfectly to Bijan. But pass pro, you can tell it's a little different situation for them. Now, again, it'll be interesting what Oklahoma does, because Alex Grinch is so fond of there's two things. He's fond of the constant rotations. I mean, Oklahoma will run their third string defensive line will get 20 snaps. I mean, it's crazy how much he'll use his depth. And I think that pays off. Maybe today, where it's going to be a hot one in the Cotton Bowl, maybe that works out for Oklahoma. The other thing that's interesting to see is they use Nick Benito as a spy a lot. And I think there is some belief around Oklahoma that maybe Texas is going to get a little heavier with RPO stuff with Casey Thompson, try to slow down that pass rush a little bit, give Oklahoma some looks. And is Alex Grinch willing to put Nick Benito in a spiral and negate your best pass rusher? Like, I don't know how he's going to feel about that. That's going to be an interesting thing because, yeah, I mean, Ketch, as well as people love to talk about spies. They rarely work very well, in my opinion. I think they're one of those things that, oh, yeah, it's great. But, I mean, cool, go spy Vince Young. See how that works out. Like, you're going to get cooked. Like, it doesn't really matter. Spy Kyler Murray. Great. Good, best of luck. But Nick Benito's really good at it. Like, he's one of those guys that has a skill set that works to it. But at the same time, if I'm Texas and Nick Benito's 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, I feel good about that play. That's I'll live with that, and I can't run Casey as compared to he's coming off my blind side against Christian Jones. Like, that's going to be a concern. And the thing I love that 12 personnel. They're going to run 2 tight ends, so they can help Christian Jones some. So, like I said, there's a lot of variables, but that is going to be a key matchup, because if he can have I believe it was the 17 game where Obo Okoronkwo had just a massive day against Texas and Chase Sam-Ellinger till they both basically passed out on the field. Or if it's like, okay, he's got a sack here, he's got a sack there, but not a lot of pressure. So that could be a real dictating factor in this game.
Feels, from my perspective, like that's making this rocket science. It's like you've got this really big potential advantage, but maybe we don't want to just take advantage of our single biggest advantage, and we put him in a different place because Texas, I would say this. You're right. The thing that you said, spot on. If Texas has to choose between Benito playing against Christian Jones for 60 plays versus him mitigating some of the Casey Thompson's run threat.
Yep. And
obviously that allows Benito to be a sideline to sideline factor in a way that, maybe you want to. I think Texas would make that trade-off because it may be the best player on the field in this game is Benito. And if you're Texas, trying to get him to not be the single biggest difference maker, is the big challenge, because this game may come down to possessions, who gets a stop, because I think both of these offenses have a chance to do some damage today. But I could see turnovers being a big part of this. And it might be that the losing team scores touchdowns on a lot of drives, except for the ones where they turn it over. And that could be the difference. You might lose by 20 and go, but we played really well. How do you think this game goes? I'll let you end with a prediction, but I'm curious about the texture and pace and style of the game. Is it Kyler Murray, Sam Ehlinger, 2018, where really it came down to the guy who had the ball last wins the game? Is it that kind of game? Or are we ignoring the fact that the running games, weirdly, the team that rushes for the most yards seems to win this game every single year, even when it's not the thing that we talk about with the winning team all the time? Break it down for me.
Yeah, I went back and looked, and since I think the 2014 game, other than the game you mentioned, the Kyler Murray, Sam Ehlinger game, that's the only time that the team who led in rushing didn't win this game. And Oklahoma, I think, doubled Texas up that day, but Sam Ehlinger was just everywhere, and all those huge third down conversions Texas came up with that day. I agree with you, though. I feel like this comes down to an off-schedule touchdown, maybe a Deshaun Jameson punt return, or a kickoff return, something like that, or an interception return for a touchdown, like something like that. That kind of feels like maybe that's the difference in this game, because I feel, like I said, I think it's tight. I don't think a lot of teams, I would say, they're not going to run the ball in Oklahoma, and I don't know that I feel like Texas is going to go drop 180 on Oklahoma today, because that's just not what OU's defense has been about. But at the same time, Bijan's so good. I mean, he's so good. He's going to pop something sooner or later. Like, you don't know what it's going to be. And you look at some of these great games, all the great backs we've watched play, even on days when, that the Texas defense was great today, or the Oklahoma defense was great today, there was that one play. There was that one or two plays where, that they made a difference. And I think Oklahoma can live with that. But if Bijan is doing what he did last week, where it's just gashing TCU for 7, 8, 12, like, it wasn't that he ripped a bunch of 50-yard runs. They just couldn't consistently stop him. So I think that's going to be a huge question in this game, and I think will be the deciding factor, honestly. If Texas can run consistently, I think they win this game. If Oklahoma can just slow him down, you're not going to stop him. I get that. He's probably going to get 1 1/4, whatever. But if you can just keep him from being a consistent chain mover, then you can win this game. I've had it somewhere around 30, Oklahoma 30 to 24 Texas, somewhere in that ballpark. I think it's a one-play game. Like, I could see anything swinging it. Honestly, I trust Oklahoma just a little bit more, but I don't trust this Oklahoma team a lot. So, we'll kind of see what we've got. They've been so wildly fluctuating, but I did think against Kansas State, you saw signs of them turning the corner and maybe growing up a little bit.
Josh McCuistion, Soonerscoop.com. Josh, thank you for what turned into a nice little 20-minute conversation. I feel more educated on the Sooners going into this game than I was otherwise. Have a great rest of the day. We'll talk soon.
Hey, sounds good, Ketch. Enjoyed it, man.
You got it. Josh McCuistion, again, Soonerscoop.com. Lots of food for thought in that conversation, and the thing that seems to be sticking with me the most coming out of that, and look, it's a good time. Give me some questions in the chat. We'll take some questions. Jason Sukumel will join us in the next hour, as will Anwar Richardson. We've got Lance Gunn later on in the show. Quandre Diggs is out there. Quandre, if you're up, and I realize it's 6:50 a.m. in Seattle, if you are, in fact, in Seattle, we were going to connect with Quandre Diggs at some point today, and he was down for it. And then I lost him. So, Quandre, if you're out there, I know it's early. I was hoping that Quandre would actually be in Dallas today, because he got his interception on Thursday night against the Rams. And then, now he's got the weekend off. I was hoping that meant he would be down in Dallas. I'm trying to track down Quandre the Giant before this show is over. I've got lots of actually little invites out to former players. So who knows what we may have in today's show, but I do know that Jason Sukumel will join us in the 9 o'clock hour, as is scheduled Anwar Richardson. So things continuing to heat up. We've also got a Mike Farrell conversation that I want to get to in a little while, because Mike was really, I know that you guys would love to choke Mike Farrell. Not to death, right? Like, I'm not saying that you guys would murder Mike Farrell for any of his thoughts and opinions on recruiting or anything like that. But I think you guys would probably like to give him a good choke. Just hands around the throat and a good little choke. And he was great. I spoke with Mike yesterday for today's pregame show, and I thought that, he's very high on Texas and Steve Sarkisian, but I thought his thoughts long-term on recruiting and transfers and Texas's position inside of it, I thought that was really interesting. So we'll do the Mike Farrell conversation probably in the next hour as well. We've got Ari Temkin, Lance Gunn, lots of stuff going on here in the Orangebloods.com pregame show, brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. Question: does Sark get the tight ends involved in the passing game? That actually is a great question. It's one of the reasons why I brought that up. So thank you, Sam Storm, for the questions. You know, when we saw Casey Thompson take over against Rice in that very first game as a starter, the tight end position came alive. You know, I really thought the tight end position all year long was going to be an area where we would see the Longhorns take advantage of that position. Some of that was like, I really like the talent. You start getting into Jatavian Sanders hasn't really been a factor there, but I thought that guy coming in as a 5-star would be. You think about Jared Wiley, you think about the fact that Cade Brewer just is always on the field. I mean, Jeff Banks has one of the, I think, deeper positions on the team, and they will play a lot of 12 personnel sets today. You will see a lot of 2 tight end sets. I think you're going to see a lot of Cade Brewer playing along the end of the line, trying to help the left tackle. You know, Christian Jones is going to need help. So I think when Nash Talks Texas mentions in the chat Gunnar Helm, he may be as talented or as good as any of them. I mean, I think when you look at his ability to come in and be an immediate impact guy, yes, to answer the question, Sam Storm, I do think the tight end position can be a big factor today. They go against Rice, and the tight end position comes alive. And it came alive in such a way that it was impossible not to realize, one of the things that we didn't see a whole lot from Hudson Card in the passing game, Hudson liked to throw the ball down the field. He was a guy, I could see why the receivers liked Hudson Card. He attacked down the field. That was one of the reasons why he won the job. Casey Thompson likes throwing to the tight ends, and yet we have not seen a lot of that since the Rice game. It wasn't the tight ends actually just were not really a factor at all against both Texas Tech and TCU. Wouldn't surprise me today if we see a callback to that. Another comment from Nash Talks Texas that makes the screen. 12 personnel is the second most used personnel group in the entire offense behind 11 personnel. I think that, so there's always a tight end on the field. It's not like Steve Sarkisian has been getting in a lot of 4 wides and not utilizing the tight end position. He is a big fan of the tight end position. I think 12 personnel may be the personnel grouping they use the most today, given Oklahoma's strength on the defensive side of the ball where it is, and the fact that, they're going to need to help probably both of their tackles today. You think about it, probably hasn't. Well, there's been so much talk about Christian Jones that there hasn't been a lot of conversation that Andre Carrick gets his first start of the season today at right tackle. And the 2 tackles for this Texas offense, the bookends of this offensive line, are probably the 2 most concerning spots on the field today. And I actually have a lot of faith in Andre Carrick. I think that guy is really talented. I mean, you're talking about a guy that I thought was a borderline, very high 4-star player coming out of high school. And it's only a matter of time, but he's inexperienced. He hasn't played in a game of this magnitude. And then you look at the left tackle, and Christian Jones is probably the worst offensive lineman that this group has had this season. That those are your tackles. It is a bit concerning. And, you know, in our conversation with Josh McCuistion, they've got to make a decision on what they want to do with Nick Bonito. Jeremiah Park says, Bijan is the best player on the field, not Bonito. I absolutely agree with you, Jeremiah. It's just that this game can't afford to have Bonito for the day be that guy. David Meadows brought it up earlier. Can you guys talk about kicker and the Texas defense? Is that Coach K and the Texas defense? Yeah, we can talk about Coach K and the Texas defense. We'll do a little bit of that right now. Again, if you're just tuning in, it is the Orangebloods pregame show. I'm Geoff Ketchum. The show is sponsored by the Loewy Law Firm, our partner in the postgame shows, but also our partner today for a special 3-hour extravaganza, if you will. Sukumel will join us in about 15, 20 minutes. Matter of fact, he just sent me a message. He's good to go at 9:15. Anwar Richardson scheduled to join us at 9:45. I tell you what, why don't we do this? Blake, I'm talking to my producer now. We're crossing streams. Do we have the Mike Farrell conversation ready to go? Because he was so good. And that was something that I wanted to play early in the show before we get closer to kickoff. Blake, if you could let me know where we stand on that. I'd love to go to the Mike Farrell interview. Blake's sending me a message right now. Yep, ready to go. So let me set this up for you. Rivals.com recruiting expert Mike Farrell joined me yesterday. We talked about this game because Farrell is predicting Texas to win the game. But we talked some recruiting. We talked about the transfer portal. It was a really good conversation. And I think when this thing is over, you're not going to want Mike Farrell. You're not going to want to put your hands around him and choke him. So I'm going to toss to the interview that I had with Mike Farrell yesterday. And then we'll come out of it. We'll have Jason Sukumel. We'll take more questions. We'll do all that jazz. But for now, here's my conversation with Mike Farrell from Rivals.com. We're now joined on the Orangebloods Texas football pregame show by Mike Farrell, Rivals.com, a hero in the Orangebloods community, brought to real life in this pregame show format. Mike, how the hell are you, my man?
A hero, huh? That's how you describe me? There's no hero portion for either Texas or Oklahoma fans. They both think I hate them equally, but I am happy to be here.
I love that you're hated by everybody equally. Like, it is. When did you know you were comfortable being hated?
Maybe 20 years ago. It took like 4 years for me to get used to being hated. And then I learned from Chris Fowler at ESPN that if you're hated by everybody equally, you're doing your job right.
It's true. Truer words have never been spoken. Mike, I wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things. Obviously, let's just start off with the game. You were predicting Texas to beat Oklahoma in this game. I asked Ari Temkin this question earlier today from SiriusXM's Big 12 show. Is Oklahoma more vulnerable, or is this them in the middle of their – they start slow all the time and they build up steam every single year, so it seems. Are both of those two things slightly like what? How do you view Oklahoma coming into this game?
I've been waiting for them to break out. Okay, and I've been waiting offensively. And by this time of year, we usually see a couple of examples of an offensive breakout. And I've been watching them. And obviously, covering the draft, I've been watching Spencer Rattler very closely. And I thought they'd be unstoppable. Kennedy Brooks back, Eric Gray addition. The offensive line looked like it was going to be good. Receivers like crazy. Spencer Rattler. Their offensive line is horrid. And I think that's going to be the issue here for them. They can't. I mean, they're averaging like 2.2 yards a carry. Rattler's running for his life every second. And the fans don't appreciate how well he moves around the pocket. But this is not the Oklahoma offense that I have confidence in that's going to put up, 50 points to win this type of game. I think Texas's offense is going to be better, and that's why I think they're going to win.
Is there a point total that you think one of these two teams has to get to in this game in order to win?
Yeah, I think it's 40. I think 40 is a good number. It's not going to be a defensive struggle. There's going to be, some turnovers. There's going to be some key points here and there. But there's also going to be a lot of big plays. There's so much talent offensively on each side. Two very good offensive coaches. We're not going to see a 13-7 game. It's going to be, 42-30, something like that is my guess. And, until that offensive line, I like I said, I thought they'd come together. And I kept watching and they're just not getting worse, but they're just not improving at all. And Bill Bedenbaugh is a great offensive line coach. There's talent there. I don't know what the problem is, but that's going to be their letdown, I believe, in this game.
Is there anything? It's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking about the Arkansas game in my head, and I'm watching you kind of rationalize Texas winning this game, and I can kind of co-sign all of it. It all sounds completely, I think right on the money. And yet I wondered, were you in a position, if I told you a few weeks ago, hey, right after the Arkansas game, just so you know, in October, you're going to pick Texas to beat Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl, would you have believed yourself to be in that position, or is that more of a blip in the radar for even in real time when it occurred?
I felt they would lose to Arkansas. I wrote about it in Fact or Fiction. I wrote about it in the Big 12 preview that I did. I felt they would lose that game. It was on the road. It's early in a new coach, getting his offense settled. New coaching staff getting the defense settled. Hadn't really settled on a quarterback yet. It was early enough for them to get beaten. Now they got beaten pretty good. So I wanted to see how they reacted, and they reacted extremely well. And what I'm seeing is a completely different offense, an offense that would scare the heck out of Arkansas now, and didn't back then. So I even put up my list of top 10 one-loss teams this week, and Texas was number one, and everybody's like, "You're crazy. Arkansas is a one-loss team. They already beat them." But I think Texas would beat them in a rematch because the offense it's finally coming together. Xavier Worthy wasn't who he is in the Arkansas game now. Bijan Robinson wasn't being utilized quite the way he is now. There's a lot more confidence with Casey Thompson at quarterback. It's a different football team. I'm not saying they beat Alabama, but I think they could beat Oklahoma.
On the recruiting side of things, I want to ask you about, we're going to segue from recruiting to the transfer market and the portal in a moment. But on the recruiting side of things, these questions kind of go hand in hand in the sense of, in the state of Texas going into this season, you have all of these forces that are kind of, I've called it the most historically competitive time in recruiting that I've ever seen, where you've got Oklahoma good, A&M good, Texas with a new coach trying to get good. You've got Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, like all the big dogs come in and carry a big stick. But then the three big regional powerhouse programs are all going into this year, at least with some buzz. Where do you think we are now in the state of Texas with recruiting? Has anything happened where the dynamics have changed? Is today potentially, we record this on Friday, but this airs on Saturday. So, do the results of Texas A&M and Alabama and whatever happens inside that stadium that, could turn recruiting on its head? I mean, we've seen that happen at Kyle Field before. Where do you think we are?
We're at player development now because we've got three tremendous recruiters. Tom Herman, I thought, would be a good recruiter. at Texas, and he had his moments. I never thought Charlie Strong would be a good recruiter at Texas. It's just a fish out of water. But Tom Herman, I thought, would be. And he didn't. Obviously, there's so many of those 5-star kids that left the state, and they didn't keep them. Steve Sarkisian is a good recruiter. Brennan Thompson just commits. He's getting, elite kids. I think they're going to get Evan Stewart. That they're doing what they need to do, especially offensively, to to keep some people at bay. But Jimbo Fisher's a great recruiter, like elite, and Lincoln Riley's a great recruiter. So what we've come down to is we've got 3 coaches there with, the ability to sell and recruit. And it's going to come down to player development. And that's kind of, it never used to be that way for me with Texas back in the day when Mac Brown was sort of picking and choosing who he wanted to. If you had 5 guys in a class that were highly rated that ended up sucking, you could be okay. But now you can't. There's too much competition. And then with Alabama coming in and Clemson and other schools coming into Texas, Ohio State, you have to be much, much better at player development. So the recruiting rankings, Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M are all going to finish in the top 15. But that doesn't matter unless you develop the players. And that's harder than recruiting. I can recruit kids to Texas. I can't develop them. So I think that's where we're at. These games matter, but then kids aren't going to make the decision based on these games alone. But the Texas-Oklahoma will influence in-state kids. It'll influence, and I'll tell you this, Arch Manning, right? Okay. Everybody talks about Arch Manning. Arch Manning was a Texas lean. And I'm going to tell you this from an unbelievable, rock-solid source. Prior to his visit tour, prior to the Arkansas game, and his family wanted to see Texas improve. And they fell off after that Arkansas game. They keep winning. That's the type of kid they're going to get, and that changes your program entirely. A lot of people think he's going to go to Georgia or LSU or Alabama. If they keep winning, he loves Sarkisian. He's going to end up there, and then you're going to see a bevy of kids follow.
Is Arch that good?
Yeah, I think he is. I always want to crap on kids that are hyped, because I'm just an old cranky person, but he's really that good. Like he's very, very mobile. And that's not something you think of for a Manning. And he's got all the arm talent and all the things you look for. And so I wanted him to not be the number 1 player in the class, just in my head. But he is. I mean, there's just no way around it. He's that good. And I just don't see any way he doesn't have success.
Last question. I just wanted to change it to the transfer portal discussion for a second. I loved your work in that field this past offseason. These are 2 teams that invested in the transfer portal. And, I don't remember what Oklahoma's final number ended up being, but they've got like 4 or 5 guys that they brought in, and at least 3 or 4 of them have pretty prominent roles. Texas, kind of the same thing. And especially if you consider Xavier Worthy to be a byproduct of the portal, which he is, even if he was a guy that just signed. Just walk me through in your head where you think the portal is going into 2022. And because I really think that it's a big, if there's no turning back, I feel like teams haven't quite figured out how to use this new world completely for their advantage. But there's a very scheming part of my brain that feels like Texas, for example, should just use every school that signs Texas kids moving forward as their minor leagues, and that they should always keep back channel conversations going with high school coaches or whoever you need to stay in touch with, so that if you need a left tackle and some guy goes to San Diego State and has a big year, you're ready to strike. Do you feel like we're headed towards a portal era where teams are going to figure this out and weaponize the entire process in a way that it becomes even more mainstream and important than it would have been a year ago, where it felt, Mike, like you and I are like digging in and like we really cared about it. And it felt like the early days of the internet where I would talk about recruiting like this, and some people just didn't get it. But I feel like we're not that far away.
No, it's mucky, it's ugly. What's changed now, I believe, roster management's changed, and obviously the NCAA is giving 7 additional scholarships to help them catch up with the super senior thing and all that stuff. You're going to have to hold back scholarships. You're going to have some available during the spring and the summer, which is the peak time. Obviously, after the season is also a peak time. What else has changed is that you can't take things personally anymore. And you used to be able to. When a kid didn't choose your school, you could tell him and his family to go pound sand and and never want to talk to you again. And I've heard some conversations from coaches that didn't get the player they wanted, and they were just horrible. Mom's crying and dad's ticked off, and the kid you can't do that anymore, because now you might get him a year later. And you also have to maintain those recruiting ties to the kid. So let's say a kid picks LSU over Texas. Well, you better stay in touch with his handler, or his uncle, or whoever else, because he might be unhappy there pretty quick, and you have to maintain that relationship. So that's changed, where you're not done recruiting a kid after he signs. You're still recruiting him. Obviously it's tampering if you are actively recruiting him, but you're checking in. You're saying, hey, crazy uncle, what's going on? How is he happy at TCU? And that's sort of the difference. I don't know if they're going to weaponize teams. I thought we would start to see this where, super teams would get even more powerful.
Yeah.
And Alabama got 2 transfers, right? Their leading receiver and their leading tackler. And that's sort of weaponizing. But people haven't figured it out yet. And it's just like JUCOs, man. It's a risky proposition, because they're in the transfer portal for a reason. Either they stink, or they're unhappy, or they're academically or off-field a little bit fishy. There's always a reason they're in the portal. Nobody's perfect. And so JUCOs, you have to weigh that as well. So a team like Michigan State, Mel Tucker's got he's got double-digit transfers on his team, and he's undefeated right now. He's figured it out early. Other teams will do that, but it's not going to be what people fear it was going to be, which is like, oh no, kid's going to play 2 years, at Syracuse. He's going to blow up, and then he's just going to go to Alabama, and Alabama's going to be. NIL has changed things. Kids want an opportunity to play. So I think it's going to be good for parity eventually. But right now, it's just kind of like, it's dirty. I mean, you've dug into it. It's just the people that I'm dealing with are not the most scrupulous human beings on earth. And they put me on it, and they said, all right, Farrell, you've been around for 100 years. You've got sources everywhere. Go deal with the portal. And I'm like, oh, come on. I got to get in the muck and figure out, who Eric Gilbert's right-hand man is.
I was wondering if we were going to get Gilbert's name mentioned in this interview.
And then
okay, back. Oh, we actually cut that interview off because we got Jason Sukamel joining us from Orangebloods.com. Thanks to Mike Farrell for joining this show, though. Just so you know, Jason, Mike, before you came on, was talking about Arch Manning. And he basically, he didn't say if Texas wins this game that they're going to get Arch Manning, but he was about an inch away from going there. He basically said if Texas, as this season goes along, catches even a little bit of fire, that they're going to get him, that it's just a matter of Texas proving itself to a certain degree. It was interesting to hear Farrell say that. You know what I mean? Like, he kind of cut through all of the other BS and really positioned Texas in a way that I haven't heard a lot of national people have the guts to completely come out and say about Texas.
Yeah, I'll be interested to go back and do a rewatch, because I'll be curious to hear exactly what Mike said. But Our guy Cole Patterson was there at Arch's game last week, and he spent some time before the game talking to Arch's coach. And I kind of echo Mike's sentiments, what you're saying, what you're relaying to me. I've always thought, Ketch, I've always said this on Orangebloods. I do a Q&A every other week, a recruiting Q&A every other week, and then a 3-2-1 column every other week. And every week in that Q&A, I get an Arch Manning question. Is Texas going to land Arch Manning? It's been going on for a year. And my answer every time is, I think Texas is in a much better position than most people realize. And it's not based on anything I've heard from Arch, because Arch doesn't really talk, and I've only kind of got third-hand Arch Manning information. But it's always based on, hey, if you just kind of look at, read the tea leaves and common sense. I mean, he's been to Austin, Steve Sarkisian. The depth chart is not going to scare Arch Manning. Eli Manning, I mean, you remember this. Eli Manning was close to being a Longhorn, I mean, at one point. So I've always thought Texas was in a pretty good position there. Cole Patterson, our guy from Orangebloods, goes there last week, talks to Arch, talks to his coach, and in talking to Cole and talking to other people, who other sources who've been close to Arch and talked to Arch, I think Texas is in a really good spot there. They want to see the Mannings want to see Texas surrounded, or Arch surrounded by talent. Texas is starting to add talent. If they win this game, that'll certainly help. Arch wants, like everybody, every high-profile recruit, he wants to play in a winning program. This weekend could be a big step in the right direction for Texas in that area. He loves Steve Sarkisian. I mean, if you talk to people around Arch Manning, they'll tell you, hey, Sark is the one head coach who has done as good a job, or probably the best job of any head coach in recruiting Arch. He really relates to him. Sark's been heavily involved. So, I'm not ready to say it's a done deal by any means if Texas beats Oklahoma in this game. But, you and I talked earlier in the week. This is a big, big recruiting opportunity for Texas. And certainly that applies for Arch Manning. I mean, he's got, Georgia still in play there. Alabama is going to be a major player. Clemson, Ole Miss is going to be a factor there, just with the ties there. But I've said this for 6 months, and certainly it will apply if Texas wins today. And I will even exaggerate the point if Texas wins today. But I've said this for 6 months. There's not a team I would put ahead of Texas in that race. If Texas wins today, I said, I don't know if Texas is the leader coming into today, but there's not a team I would put in front of Texas. If Texas wins today, I might be willing to go ahead and push Texas out in front of all those other schools I just mentioned.
Well, because, Jason, it goes to kind of what we've, it's an interesting thing to be on the cusp of the thing that we've talked about for so long, which is, Texas goes through the summertime and the momentum lagged a little bit in recruiting. It felt like the true elite in-state guys were waiting for someone wanted to be, everybody needed somebody else to be the first guy. Mm-hmm. And because there wasn't a first guy, it was a case where they weren't getting any guys. And obviously they picked up some recruiting momentum over the course of the last 6 weeks or so. And they've been able to do it without the real shot in the arm in recruiting that we talked about, where when Devin Campbell and Evan Stewart and Cam Dewberry and all these kids say, we want to see Texas first. What that really is code for is when they play a team like Oklahoma, are they going to win that game and emerge from it nationally relevant, or are they going to, get sucked back into the underbelly of Big 12 mediocrity? We're a couple of hours away from finding out if the answer is yes, they can get beyond that. That's the thing that all of these kids deep down have been wanting to see, some actual results from Texas that matches the bluster that they hear in recruiting. If we said it earlier in the week, they lose this game, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but if they win it, I think it changes the platform that their message is being heard from. And it's the kind of thing that only winning a game like this provides.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think if they play well, as you just said, in a close loss, they can still use that as a momentum builder. They can still go to these recruits and say, hey, look, man, we're close. This is a top 5 team. We played them close. We just need you, Evan Stewart, to come. We need you, Cam Dewberry, to come along and help us be the pieces to the puzzle to get us over the hump. A win, then you're really selling momentum. But you're right. It was funny. There was a while after the summer where in the summer, frankly, where Texas missed on some guys and they didn't have the recruiting momentum people, the people to get some Nike gear. I have some Under Armour gear I actually had to trade out for my Adidas. Hey, at least I'm coordinating here a little bit, right? But on point here, Texas did not have a lot of momentum in the summer. They were missing out on guys. A&M picked up some guys. Oregon picked up a couple offensive line commitments from Texas. So people were wondering, like, where is this recruiting momentum? Where's this first year bump for Steve Sarkisian and staff? And, it kind of took a while for me to process it. But, normally when a staff comes in, they get that kind of first year recruiting bump. People are excited. Some recruits are like, hey, I want to go, it's kind of the new shiny toy. I want to go play with that and go play at this school. Well, Texas didn't necessarily get that. And that's not to say they weren't recruiting well. They had Jaden Blue and Malik Murphy already committed, but they hit a little bit of a lag. And you're right, Ketch. It was most recruits were saying, hey, I need to see it. I need to see it in the fall. I'm taking a wait and see approach with this. Evan Stewart told me that directly. He said, yeah, I want to wait and see what Texas does in the fall, and a few others. But Evan Stewart pops to mind because he's arguably the top prospect on Texas's board. And you kind of get it, man. I mean, Tom Herman got that first year bump. Okay. And these kids remember that. And then they saw 4 years of mediocrity. Charlie Strong got that bump, and they saw what happened with Charlie Strong. I mean, these kids were, 9, 10 years old at that time, but probably still watching. So Sark, unfortunately, didn't get that same benefit of the doubt. I mean, kids have seen, hey, I've seen it before, and I've had the rug pulled out from under me on Texas. So they wanted to see proven results. This is a chance today, as you said, in about an hour and a half. This is a chance for Texas to say, look, we are showing you proven results. Yeah, we stumbled early in Arkansas, but we've got it figured out now. We're on a 4-game winning streak. We are the team in the Big 12 conference to beat. We just took down Oklahoma, the perennial champion in this league. We are now the team to beat. We are a legitimate title contender. They've got a lot to sell if they can go out and win this game. But hey, that's a big if. We'll have our answer here later this afternoon. But certainly they've started to build some momentum. These guys that you mentioned, the Evan Stewart, those offensive linemen that are taking Devon Campbell, that are taking a wait and see approach. This is their chance. They've been doing the wait. This is their chance to do the seeing part of it.
Jason, and again, Jason Sukamel joining me here on the Orangebloods pregame show, sponsored by the Loewy Law Firm. When we let's look at a world where Texas wins today. I'm guessing that makes the Oklahoma State game next weekend the primetime game, right? So they're waiting on the outcome of
either
this
11
game.
or 6, I think they haven't said, but either morning again or the evening primetime, right?
And suddenly this is a primetime matchup between teams, most likely both ranked in the top 20 at that point.
Sure.
Paint the picture for me, Arch Manning coming to town. Just before we talk about Texas and OU, the game in a minute, I'm just curious what you think a night game against Oklahoma State with Arch Manning in town and at that point, the ability for other kids to come in a way that it's really hard on 11 a.m. game days to get recruits to come in because – they had games the night before. What do we think that turns into in terms of a recruiting moment during the season?
Biggest recruiting weekend of the season by far. This weekend is big in terms of perception. And I've got a visit list over here on my other screen. I mean, it's big in terms of visitors too. Devon Campbell's going to be there. Evan Stewart, some of the guys we just mentioned. But today's game being on a neutral site, these recruits can come to the game. Texas can give them tickets. The coaches can't interact with these recruits at all. I'm not even sure. I think even when they leave the stadium, there are new rules. I'm not even sure they can Zoom, like FaceTime with the kids when they're leaving the stadium. Sure, they can call them and text them and those things, but there can be no face-to-face interaction today. So it's more about, hey, come watch us play, see the environment. If you come to Texas, you get to play in this kind of game, so on and so forth. Next weekend, the Oklahoma State game is setting up to be their biggest recruiting weekend in terms of official visitors. in terms of unofficial visitors. Guys like Arch Manning in the 2023 class will be in. I expect a lot of other 2023s. Reuben Owens will be there, probably. Jonte Cook, the wide receiver, will be there. But they're going to have a bunch of official visitors in, too. They're going to have 2 out-of-state offensive linemen, Ernest Green, Malik Agbo, 2 guys from the West Coast will be in on official visits. They're going to have Larry Turner Gooden, a defensive back's going to be in on an official visit next weekend. So, and I've been told that just about all of the committed guys are going to be in for that game. I don't know if that includes Malik Murphy and some of the out-of-states, but those current Texas commits have been talking. They are all trying to come in for that game together so they can kind of make a recruiting impact on some of these other guys I've talked about. But yeah, it has a next weekend, as big as this weekend is from perception. Next weekend will be their biggest recruiting weekend in season. They had some big visit weekends in June where they had large numbers of recruits, but in terms of in-season impact, this is the game that the Texas coaches have circled, that Oklahoma State game that they have circled. They're targeting that one to bring in as many guys as they can and try to make an impact. And if they can go into that one, hey, coming fresh off of a win against Oklahoma, all the better, of course. So Oklahoma State will come into that game undefeated. Oklahoma State's off this week, so they'll come into that game undefeated. It just has, again, these next 2 weeks, I'm always the guy, Catch, you know me, I'm always the guy that says, hey, slow down with all this. I mean, let's not overstate things. But seriously, I think these next 2 weeks have a chance to be program changing for Texas and Steve Sarkisian. I don't think I'm overstating things to say that if they can win this week against Oklahoma, win next week against Oklahoma State in front of these recruits, this can really be the fuel that takes this program to where Texas fans have been aching for it to be for the better part of the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you look back, you go back to Mac Brown's first season and that staff, I mean, Mac's arguably the greatest recruiter in the history of college football. Tim Brewster, and probably on the Mount Rushmore of recruiting assistants all time. So they were going to recruit eventually, but beating Nebraska in Lincoln and the shot in the arm that gave the program just on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and the rest of the weekend, not just in the moment on a Saturday, was hard to quantify. I think it's as simple as this. You got Arch Manning in town next weekend. If that game's at 11 o'clock, the coaches will tell you, well, it lets us spend a little bit more time with him later on. They can spin it into a positive. But it'll have meant that you lost the Oklahoma game, and the atmosphere at 11 a.m. can only be so good. That game, if they beat Oklahoma today, and they play that game next week in prime time, and everything that you laid out, the stadium will be supercharged for that Oklahoma State game in a way that maybe you'd have to go back to Notre Dame back in, 2016 to find a moment where, like, the stadium's just on fire for a game. You win this week, and that place is on fire next week. And like you said, finish the deal, and suddenly everything really becomes possible. It speaks to the weight of, I think, what's on the line for the long-term future. Like, today can't be stated. A win for Texas is the biggest win in this series since 2009. Like, it really has a chance to elevate Texas in a way that we talk about Texas being able to elevate itself, but there are only so many opportunities that provide that kind of springboard. And
let's not lose sight, Catch. You got A&M playing tonight.
Yeah.
A&M's been recruiting really well. They have become a thorn in the side for Texas in recruiting more than they have been in the past probably 10 years. And this is an A&M team that could lose its third straight game tonight. Likely is going to lose its third straight game tonight. So, I mean, everything's setting up perfectly for Texas, right?
But to be fair, it's wild because a win, if A&M found a way
to win,
that
changes the narrative completely. Yeah.
Or if they're just super competitive.
They're kind of like Texas today. They don't necessarily have to win, but if they just show up and play well, yeah.
Can't get your ass kicked. But if you show up and when that game's over, you can point to a kid and say, you feel the electricity in the stadium, you feel The difference between us winning that game and losing that game is you. That is a hell of a pitch. It's amazing that both Texas and Texas A&M have potential moments available to them on the same day, because if you're A&M, it probably doesn't materialize for the rest. This is it for them. Like, this is their moment. You could make a case for Texas, lose this game, it's competitive, but play Oklahoma in a rematch and win that, and it changes everything. But these nuclear moments, if you will, they don't grow on trees, and it's why when you're in them, as best you can, you have to be able to take advantage of them, because you might spend the next 12 months talking about what you need to do the next time you're in one.
Well, it makes for a fun Saturday if you're a Texas and Texas A&M fan. I mean, this could be a monumental day for in the landscape for both of those programs. So if you're a Texas fan, you're hoping, as Nick Saban said, you're hoping that Alabama doesn't fall for a trap game this weekend, and Alabama comes in focused and lays the wood to A&M. You know, Nick Saban said that. He said this is a potential trap game for them. So I went and looked at their schedule. It's a trap game is usually like when you're playing a lesser opponent and you have a huge game next week. This game is sandwiched by, I think they played Ole Miss and Mississippi State next week, Alabama. So it's not like they've got, Georgia on the schedule. So I thought that comment was really interesting on a lot of levels. But if you're a Texas fan, which you obviously need to hope for is a Texas win, you hope for that every week. But this is a week, if you're a Texas fan, you really should be watching that A&M game closely on Saturday night and hoping Alabama just comes in and takes them to the woodshed.
Yeah, because say what you want to about A&M, they can get an atmosphere going in a big way, especially in prime time. Talking to Jason Sukumo here on the Orangebloods pregame show, brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. All right, Jason, let's talk a little actual football on the field. I talked with Josh McQuistion earlier in the show. Mm-hmm. He was picking Oklahoma 30-24-ish. Mm-hmm. Didn't think there was going to be as many points involved. I'm curious, day of, has your mind changed on where you think, like, the pace of this game?
Man, this is going to sound weirdly obsessive, but as you just said that, it just popped it. I had a dream last night, and I didn't even remember it until you were just talking. Oh, my goodness, I had a dream about this game. That's how much this game's been on my mind. Apparently,
well, what happened in the dream? Do you remember?
Yes, I do. In fact, I'm one of those few who actually remembers my dreams. I remember it was I don't remember how it ended, but it was a very shockingly low scoring game. And I remember in my dream thinking, wow, this is a low score in the game the way I thought it would be early in the week is what I said on our modcast. I don't know what that says about me that I'm dreaming about the Texas-Oklahoma game on Friday nights. But
it sounds like you're one of the sick bastards that's on Orangebloods all the time, and God love you for it.
Yeah, hey, man, it's good to have a good game that we're all excited about, right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't feel like we've had this kind of game with this kind of energy and excitement. We haven't had enough of them at Orangebloods in a while, so it's good to have that. So, I don't know. Maybe that was a sign. Early in the week, I thought it was going to be a lower scoring game than people realized. I don't know why that is. I think Texas might try. I'm so torn, and I wish I could get inside Sark's head. I think Texas might try to take the air out of the ball a little bit. That's what teams have done. It's what West Virginia did, and that's what teams have done. Nebraska did it to keep Oklahoma games close, to keep that offense off the field. They have literally limited OU's possessions by sitting on the football when the opposing team is on offense. So is Texas going to do that? It's a strategy that's worked for other teams, worked for Nebraska, worked for West Virginia. That's not Sark's mentality normally. So I'm curious if he's going to look at that and say, hey, this is what other teams have done. It's worked. It's kept their offense out of rhythm. Spencer Rattler hasn't been able to settle in and kind of get hot and find a rhythm. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. Or is Sark going to do what he loves to do and say, no, we're going to go up tempo. We're going to take some shots downfield and do the things he likes to do. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm extremely excited and curious to see what their offensive game plan or what their overall game plan is. But my mentality hasn't changed, Ketch. I still think Texas is on par and on paper the equal team, maybe even better when I break down my matchups. I still think I'm still picking Texas to win this game. I had it 31-30 earlier in the week, And I had it 31-30 earlier in the week on our actual predictions on Orangebloods. Maybe I'm going to lower that number just because my dream told me to, but I'm sticking to my guns. I'm picking Texas to win this one in a slight upset. I think it's a 3-point spread as last time I checked, so it wouldn't be a monumental upset in terms of point spread. But no, I still think it's going to be close. I think it's going to come down not just to the fourth quarter. I think this one may come down to the final seconds. Either way, I'm putting my faith in Cameron Digger. I think Texas still gets the win.
Hold that thought for just a second, Jason. I see that Scott Brown is sending me love notes in the chat.
Yeah.
Says I'm way cuter than Herb Street. He does.
Scott, you sure Scott's not looking at me and not you, right? He's not getting us confused there, right?
Scott Brown, former KI alumnus.
Oh, okay.
Like both of us.
Okay, wow, yeah.
Matter of fact, there had to have been a moment at some point during your time there, Jason, when Scott would have still been there.
Probably.
So it's a KI reunion of sorts.
Small world.
I think Scott got jealous the last time. I can't remember what happened. Scott, you'll know what this means. I'm blowing you a kiss. He got jealous the last time that kisses were being blown and didn't get one. Okay, back to the Texas OU conversation. Sorry, I had to give my man Scott a little bit of love there. When I was talking to McQuistion, it was so interesting to hear him talk about – we had the conversation about the Texas offense against the OU defense and running the football. And I remember we were talking about 200 yards and how I think everybody on the Orangebloods staff felt like, look, man, Texas is going to run the football. And it was a lot more about Texas than it was about Oklahoma. I got the sense from Josh that there were things – they're worried about motion and they're worried about misdirection things and a lot of different things about the Texas offense. I don't get the sense from Josh that OU fans or people following the OU team think that Texas is just going to line up and run the football on Oklahoma. And it's interesting the amount of confidence on both sides of the ball or both sides of the game coming into this game, because the conversation on our modcast sounded completely different than listening to Josh talk about that exact same thing.
That's interesting. I always talk to sources on the other side to do my matchups. I didn't talk to Josh, and I know Josh well. I probably should have. Josh is one of my favorite dudes in this industry. But I talked to other people on the Oklahoma side. And, I mean, their run defense is phenomenal. I mean, I can certainly understand why Josh feels that way. But the people I talked to said, yeah, it's been a great run defense, but Bijan Robinson is a completely different animal than what they've faced. I think the bigger concern that I picked up is they're more worried about they think people I talk to think Bijan's going to get his. He's going to get his yards. Yeah. Texas is going to run. And he's not going to run for 200 or anything. I don't think they're expecting that. I think if Oklahoma, if anybody at Oklahoma said, hey, he's going to run for 150 or 200, then they're going to be in trouble. But, Bijan's going to make his plays, but they are worried about, or Oklahoma internally, the team is worried about the running backs making plays out of the passing game. That's something they've really struggled with. I think it was against Kansas State last week. They said, after the game, their coaches were like, man, you'd think we never prepared for that. And we did, but we just couldn't stop it. So I'll be curious this week. I mean, Bijan's going to get his touches, of course. It may not, and you mentioned it, Ketch, earlier in the week, Keelan Robinson could be involved. I mean, Roschon Johnson. It may not all be in just traditional handoffs. They may find ways, Texas may find ways to get these guys involved in the passing game too, essentially run handoffs that are thrown laterally. I mean, you get them on swing passes, you get them on, whatever, shovel passes, whatever you want to do, but screens. Oklahoma's been susceptible to that before. So I could see Texas maybe trying to integrate that a little bit more, which maybe takes away from some of the ground and pound philosophy we saw last week with Bijan against TCU. But, their run defense is the strength of their defense. Statistically, it's the strength likely of their team overall, even including their offense, the way they've played through the first part of the season. So, yeah, there's reasons to think if you're on the Oklahoma side, hey, we're not too worried about the run game, but, we'll see how this Bijan Robinson's a different back, a different player than they've faced at any point this season. So I think Bijan will get his, but I do think Texas is going to have to find a way, or is probably going to find a way, to get Bijan Robinson involved more in the passing game. We haven't seen that a lot. I mean, Bijan Robinson, in my eyes, I've been covering recruiting for 20 years, and I thought, Najee Harris was one of the best receiving running backs I've ever seen in covering recruiting, and you're starting to see that in the NFL a little bit. Bijan Robinson is one of the best receiving running backs I've ever seen. I remember talking to his high school coach, and his high school coach told me, hey, there is no question in his mind. He said, Bijan is the best receiving running back in the country. He's probably a better receiver than most of the 5-star receivers in the country. I mean, this is a guy that has incredible hands. He's a skilled route runner, just has a good feel for that aspect of the game. We haven't seen Deuce Vaughn had 10 catches, Kerry says. We haven't seen Texas force that issue with Bijan Robinson. Maybe this is the week where they really unleash him in the passing game too.
Jason Sukumel, Orangebloods.com. Remind everybody of your prediction before we go.
I've got Texas 31, Oklahoma 30. I've got Texas on a last-second field goal, winning at 31-30.
Sounds like your prediction of the game is better than the dream you had of this game. Here's hoping.
More exciting for sure.
You need better dreams, my friend. Jason Sukumel, Orangebloods.com. Thanks for joining us. Go do your thing, and we'll see you online, and we'll be reading your post-game thoughts and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I'll be tracking down recruits after the game as well, so we'll have some of that on Orange Bloods as well.
Yeah, it'll be a full day. Thanks to Jason Sukumel for joining us here on the show. Anwar Richardson going to join us here on the Orange Bloods pregame show, scheduled for this hour. So I'm waiting. Let me see if Anwar will be here. Got any moment now. So Anwar Richardson will be joining us. The fun just continues. But thanks to Jason Sukumel for joining us here on the Orange Bloods pregame show. Going strong now, 100 minutes strong, as we wait for Anwar Richardson to join us momentarily. Lance Gunn, former Texas All-American, former 3-time All-Southwest Conference player. He's a current Hall of Honor He's a current, slow down, Ketch. You've been drinking too early. He's a current Hall of Honor member, and he's also 4-0 all time against Oklahoma. It was funny. I was thinking about Peter Gardere and his 4-0 record against Oklahoma, and I thought, God, it must suck to have been on Peter Gardere's team and also have gone 4-0, and that Peter Gardere gets Peter Gardere 4-0 against Oklahoma, and none of the other guys that played in that same 4-year window ever get that same moniker. And then I looked it up and I was thinking about it. I was like, Lance Gunn was on that team. So we'll talk to Lance Gunn in the next hour about what it takes to beat Oklahoma. What was it about the mindset of those teams where they beat Oklahoma every single year? The kind of thing that Oklahoma players know about right now and can kind of convey to their own teammates. Texas got to find a way to break through this barrier of Oklahoma just dominating this rivalry in a way that it has over the course of really the last decade. It's funny. I wrote in 2009, a lot of people get on me about the Oklahoma fans love to tell me about the worm turning, because I wrote a column back in 2009 that the worm had turned. And after Oklahoma having dominated the rivalry for so long, the context in that was both Texas and Oklahoma started the year ranked in the top 5 going into the 2009 season. And Oklahoma played BYU in the season opener. And Sam Bradford gets hurt in that game, separates his shoulder, or was the broken clavicle? I forget exactly what, collarbone. He suffers the injury. Their season kind of goes off the rails. And then Texas obviously goes and plays in the national championship. I wrote an article that September that talked about how the worm was turning and that Texas and Oklahoma had switched roles. And you know, Oklahoma fans love to get at me about that column, because Oklahoma they love to forget that after I wrote the column, Texas beat Oklahoma that year for the fourth time in 5 years. And they went on to win the Big 12, and they went on to play in the national championship, really validating the thing that I had written, which was the worm had turned. It had. Texas was in complete control of the rivalry and had surged to the top of national prominence between the two schools. And then, poof, gone in almost what do we even say about 2010? Gone in that abomination of a season. Oklahoma retook control of the series in 2010, and they haven't let go of it since. And this has turned into a game where you remember the occasional Mac Brown victory lap or the occasional Charlie Strong gets to wear the golden hat and have the highlight moment of his tenure, or Sam Ehlinger had to take that loss, moment with Kyler Murray. It has turned into a moment game for Texas. And as Chris Bennett points out, since that 2009 game, Texas is 3-9, 3-10 against Oklahoma. If you include the Big 12 championship game in 2018, like that has to stop. This has to stop being the moment game. Mac had a moment. Charlie had a moment. Tom Herman and Sam Ehlinger had a moment. This thing has to get back into something that's far more competitive. Texas is the little brother in this game that it likes to claim that Texas A&M is in their rivalry. And it doesn't matter what the all-time series number is. It matters what is happening right now. And I'll put those numbers up again. There's no way to get around the fact that Texas goes 4-1. They completely, because you got to remember that going into 2005, now we're into the history. For those of you born after 2000, apologies in advance. But Oklahoma owned the series from 2000 to 2004. Texas takes it back from them in 2005 all the way through 2009. And since then, 3-10 in the last 13 matchups. This has to be a game that the Longhorns at some point can get back in control of. Today's a moment where that can happen. Joining us right now, you guys have been waiting for the drunk uncle. You've been waiting for Anwar Richardson with the suit and the tie and looking good at the Cotton Bowl to join the Orangebloods.com pregame show sponsored by the Loewy Law Firm. Anwar, good to see you.
It's good to
We'll
be here.
start
How do I sound, by the way?
You sound good.
Okay, good. The microphone's a little bit away, so I'm just making sure it's a different setup here. So I'm just making sure everything's good. Hey, for those who are watching, press box view. I'm turning around.
Now you're just showing off.
Field is down there. So we're getting close.
Look at you. Looking good, sounding good, feeling good.
I won't say feeling good. Went out last night. I won't say feeling.
Oh, you did the Friday. Who'd you hang out with last night? Can you even say?
So I took Serenity out to a BMD who had like an event. So I took her there, and then Clarence Hill had a party in downtown, and I took her to that. And then, we're both hurting at this moment. You're a quarter of your staff is doing the best that they can. I'm just being honest. We're going to make it through, though.
That 11 a.m. kickoff can hurt a person.
It can. Oh, someone said the Ganado Gangster, which is hilarious, by the way. Scott Brown says the Ganado Gangster.
Yes. I've already blown Scott Brown a kiss earlier today. Well, Anwar, paint the picture for us. You're there. You're at the Cotton Bowl. You've made the walk. Like, give me an idea. Paint the picture for me.
Catch, it's a really, it's great. to be back in this environment. Last year it just wasn't the same, obviously, with it being a quarter full. And so being back, like for instance, something I'll post this while we're talking, this, the buses and seeing the teams arrive and it's funny. I talked to like one of the interns here, and she was telling me how like they got here. She's like, people booed me, and I didn't understand why. I'm like, yeah, it's just she was wearing orange, and it just kind of what it is. So she's literally just an intern. But it's been a fun atmosphere, fun to kind of relive it, fun just to kind of just be back in it. So it's good. Everyone's out in the fairgrounds doing their thing. Sort of game day. And that crowd that's back there, I'm sure a lot of people are probably doing double duty right now as far as watching game day and this. But Catch it was just it's what they say. It's good to be home, as Kanye would say. It's good to be home.
Is there a matchup or component of this game that you wake up thinking more about today than just anything else?
No. It's here's the funny thing. We do so many videos. I can't say that there's been one thing, Catch, that I would say, oh man, I'm thinking about this more than anything else. But I will say, to a certain degree, I feel like we can't undersell Casey Thompson in his first really big game. He came in. The Louisiana, he comes off the bench. Arkansas, he comes off the bench. What's up, Brian Davis? Come on in, Brian Davis.
OB, what's up? Catch, what's up, man?
Brian Davis is in the house.
Yeah, Brian Davis is here. Everyone's in a great mood. Can't undersell though, Catch. This is a big game, for Casey. A guy who grew up playing, as an OU fan, a guy who grew up on the OU side, a guy whose family this, and then coming here in this atmosphere, it's huge. He hasn't had this yet. This would be his first big test on how he survives this. So I would say, if anything, Catch, seeing how he, Spencer Rattler, no matter what we think, he's at least had this before. He won't be fazed by the crowd, the atmosphere, any of those type of things. This will be new for Casey, and how he handles that will be paramount and important as to how Texas is able to be kind of success they'll have today.
Anwar, it's interesting. We've talked all week long, I feel like, a lot about the Texas offense, the Texas running game, the Texas, the quarterback situation. Not a ton of talk about the Texas defense. You mentioned Spencer Rattler and the fact that he's played in this game again. Let's just spend a little bit of time talking about that matchup. This Oklahoma offense against a Texas defense that they've been good, but they haven't been – they've also not been good, but they've mostly been good. They just aren't making a ton of explosive plays. Can they get by today with sound, or does there need to be some spectacular mixed in there? Because this game that's often won by the team that's able to make that big signature play, and a lot of times that's either special teams or defense.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question, a good one as well. They've been I think TCU was kind of like a come down, right? For a certain degree. I mean, because again, we were at a point, Catch, where we're talking about, since the Alamo Bowl, Casey's scored in, all but 2 drives or 1 drive and stuff. And then we knew at some point reality would kick in. And so, but you're right. Like when it comes to the special plays, that's what's probably going to determine the game. It may be a Deshaun Jameson, right? And what he does on special teams and in that field position, which I think is going to be really important, really crucial. A turnover is obvious. I say it and I believe it. Spencer Rattler will give Texas opportunities. Spencer Rattler will give Texas chances, and Texas is going to have to score. When that opportunity presents itself, when that turnover is there, he's got to be able to be. Texas has got to be able to kind of do the damn thing. Thanks, Bill, by the way. Texas return games are good, yes. And so Shout out to Bill Biddick, by the way. So I definitely do believe, Catch, that it will be the little things. Like we expect Bijan to be Bijan, and I don't think we're expecting anything bad from KC. But yeah, I definitely think that's going to be playing part of it. And I still think, Catch. I still think Texas receivers have been a little bit inconsistent this season, and I still think that's going to be an important component. They can't have drop balls, like the way we've seen all throughout this season. Like there has to be a level of consistency in order for Texas to have success.
It's funny. Bill Biddick mentioned he's shocked by how many people are glossing over the subpar game that Casey had last week. Bill, I think some of that is everybody remembers the drop passes when they add up. So you can always point to a final stat line, but if you say complete those passes, add all the yards, and then tell me how different it looks, I think that impacts it a little bit. But I talked with Josh McQuistion from Soonerscoop.com about an hour ago, Anwar. Mm-hmm. He kind of glossed over the Casey game as well. There was his attitude towards Casey Thompson is, I think Casey's going to play well. I don't think anybody thinks that last week was kind of anything other than an anomaly, and like they know that he's going to play well. Any chance we're taking that for granted at all? That last week's game was a sign that there's a lower floor for him than maybe, because I think we thought at worst we were going to see from Casey Thompson it's solid, and last week they were so uneven in the passing game. Any chance at all that the Texas passing game just doesn't happen today, and suddenly you're one-dimensional on offense, and I don't know. I don't even know what that game looks like if Texas is unable to throw the ball.
So what I would say, Bill, and so you catch, obviously, I don't think you can live in a world of absolutes with a first-year starter. You can't say guaranteed what Casey's going to do. We don't know. I think we kind of have an idea what Spencer's going to do, and I think that's fair. Like we can pinpoint and say he's probably going to have this many yards, this many touchdowns, probably interception. And that's fine. But I think the reason why you got to take certain things into consideration is that I think TCU has always played Texas tough. It's just what happens. Gary Patterson, I don't know what he does in the other games, but for some reason he always plays Texas tough. He's made, he made Casey Sanders he made Casey Sanders look human. He also made Sam Ehlinger look human every single season as well. So we got to give Gary. I think what it is, Catch, is giving more Gary Patterson credit than it is knocking Casey Thompson. I think this game will be the game that we know was the TCU, the anomaly, or kind of a signs of thing to come, right? I think we knew, for instance, Gerard Hurd, right? Gerard Hurd that had that game against Cal, and you're like, holy crap. And then teams started getting film on him, and then all of a sudden, everything started to decline after that. I think we'll know more after this game if TCU was the anomaly, or if teams got film on KC, and then what do you do from there?
If you're Oklahoma, talking to Anwar Richardson here on the Orangebloods pregame show, brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. Thanks to Adam Loewy for stepping up and sponsoring the pregame show. As he sponsors. What's that?
Said appreciate you, Adam. Absolutely.
If you're Oklahoma, what would you most want to take away in the passing game, right? Is it as simple as don't let Xavier Worthy big play you in this game? Are you more comfortable? If you have to give something up and you're trying to take away the run game and you're trying to stop a number one receiving threat, if you're Oklahoma, where would you aim first and how do you do it?
I think if you're Oklahoma, what you've got to say to yourself is Texas hasn't really connected on the deep passes. And so because Texas has not connected on deep passes, you've got to say, all right, we're going to make sure Bijan doesn't get off. And we'll take our chances with these receivers. We'll check out chances on this quarterback trying to connect deep. I think you're Oklahoma. I mean, you probably you play some sort of zone, like something that keeps people in front of you. But I don't think if you're Oklahoma, you worry about guys getting behind you. And now you say, hey, if they get behind us, so be it. Like, it happened, and it is what it is. But if you are, if I'm them, you stop Bijan as best as you can, and then you say, hey, make Jordan Whittington, make Xavier Worthy, make Marcus Washington, Cade Brewer, or go down the list. Let those guys beat us. And can those guys beat us? I think that's exactly what you have to do.
Well, what's funny about that is I think that's what the Texas defense may do to the Oklahoma offense, that in a way we're looking at two offenses that have both struggled to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we may see that both teams game plan to make the other team do exactly that. And then maybe this game turns into which of these two quarterbacks can do that thing with the big play down the field that they haven't otherwise done all season. And the team that does that, I feel like there's a lot of things that we say the team that does that's going to win the game. Yeah. But it does feel like if you're hitting the big plays down the field in the passing game in this game and the other team isn't, it's a pretty big ace up the sleeve there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I would tell you know, and that's the thing, like, you know, Texas just hasn't. I don't. I think I looked up the stat earlier, Catch, and I can look it up. And we're talking. I don't think Texas has completed a pass over 40 yards this season. You know, everything's been kind of short underneath, and so if you're Oklahoma, you got to say, all right, that's not what they do. If it happens, we'll adjust. But until then, we just got to hope that they can't. They're this is not their bread and butter. Their bread and butter and their big thing is Bijan, right? And you take care of that.
Anwar, paint me a picture of what the world looks like at 3:00 today if Texas wins. What brave new world awaits a Steve Sarkisian program where they've slayed the biggest dragon that they can slay, and they put themselves into a position where, you know, maybe even at that point getting to Dallas isn't the number, you know what I mean? That feels like that's been the goal, like get to the game and you've had a good season, but they win today and expectations are going to get crazy. The excitement's going to get crazy. And what's it look like from your perspective?
I mean, it'll be all hype, no breaks at that point, because then you start looking at what other one-loss teams are there, you know? And I think if you're a Texas fan, first of all, if you win this game, I mean, I don't know odds or percentages, but it would take some sort of catastrophe, I would say, that Texas would not make it to the Big 12 championship game, right?
That'd be a big disappointment.
It would, it'd be a huge failure, right? So I think you win this game because, you know, what you've got to say, all right, you beat Oklahoma, even if you lose one more, you start talking about tiebreakers, right? And so no matter what, you're in the tiebreaker category where you start feeling pretty good about where you're at. I think that the Big 12 becomes kind of a big conversation at that point. You know, Texas probably ends up being ranked in the teens at that point, Catch, 15, 14, 13 on the outside looking in. If they beat Oklahoma State the following week, then obviously you could be talking about a top 10 team. So I think if they beat OU, I think the hype train starts getting out. I think the hype train starts. You know, I think I'm trying to think the last time Texas had a lot of hype mid-season or in the season. Was it maybe Charlie's year when he beat Notre Dame? Was that?
Yeah, because they at that point hopped into the top 10, and it was like, here we go.
Yeah.
And then not so much.
Yeah.
But
correct.
There was a moment there where it got pretty hype in September. It's different after Oklahoma, though. I mean, you know, even the year you start talking about OU wins or Texas wins over OU that you've seen. I guess in 2018 they win this game, and it puts them in a position coming out of it where the expectation is Big 12 championship game. Like, you got to get there if you're going to go ahead and beat Oklahoma, and they do that. It'll just be fascinating to see how hype it gets.
Yeah.
Because
it'd be a lot, I would say, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to hear non-Texas fans start to joke about the whole Texas is back thing, right? That is the underlying joke that won't go away. But, yeah, you start to think about this team this season, and, Bill Biddick mentioned playoff, the P word. Like, I don't know that you can go there that quickly, but beat Oklahoma State next week, and then that's legitimate. Now you're talking about at that point be wins over number 4, wins over, I think Oklahoma State's 12th in one of the polls. So, now you've got big wins to hang your hat on, and you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel with regards to the heavyweights on the schedule.
Yes. And the thing is, I think that when we start thinking of like narratives, right? The Steve Sarkisian national narrative, I mean, overall is a pretty good one, right? I know he's not unlikable where people crap on him for anything.
Yeah.
And it's important that the conversation is important is then when you start having national people talk about him, and it will be in a positive light and a positive nature, and that will add to the hype train. Like, it will absolutely add to it. The redemption story will add to the hype train, and so I beat OU. You say, you talked about victories. Catch, I think I've only seen 2 covering this beat. Charlie beat him one season. And then Tom in 2018. So for him to come in and do what most coaches at Texas have failed to do, which is beat OU in year 1, it would be a pretty monumental achievement. And then we'll revisit the Arkansas loss, which he apparently loves people bringing up. And I think this win will be the thing that makes people put Arkansas in the rear view. Because I think the Oklahoma win will be a greater talking point than the Arkansas loss.
Anwar, I'll end it with this, mainly out of fairness and the fact that it's possible. What's the world look like today at 3 o'clock if Oklahoma wins this game? And I know the texture of the game matters, but at that point we're talking about a 4-2 Texas team with losses in the 2 biggest games of the season up to date.
I mean, it becomes the danger territory of indifference. And I think that's where the fan base becomes, indifferent at that point. Then it becomes like, all right, let's just see what happens, hope for the best. We won't be at that point, Catch, where you got to try to get seniors to a bowl game. This is one of my favorite / least favorite cliches that coaches give, which is, hey, we just got to get seniors to a bowl. And I'm like, yeah, because that's what everyone's playing for, right? That's what rallies the troops.
Xavier Worthy's getting hyped now at the thought of one win closer to getting those seniors to a bowl game.
Yeah. So we won't be at that point. But, I think it'll be a disappointment. I think because, Catch, Texas fans, enter this. I would say Texas fans, you enter this game saying, our team has got a shot. And they say it every year, right? But this is the kind of year that you could walk away saying, these are the reasons why I really feel like Texas could win. You look at our staff predictions, Catch. I mean, it was kind of split, I would say. Yeah. And that's not an all everyday thing. So I think there'll be some disappointment that creeps in. I think there'll be some indifference that creeps in. Oklahoma State game ends up being probably an 11 o'clock game as opposed to a night game. There'll be some hype over Arch coming, but that would be it, And so I think it would be a letdown. I think it'd be a little bit of a disappointment, for everyone involved. And then it's just kind of at that point, you definitely know that Sark can't lose any more games in order to get to the championship game. So I think it'd be a disappointment, and I think indifference would creep in.
Yeah, really. There's such a thin. It's an amazingly thin line between all-time hype and let's wait and see what next week looks like.
Correct.
It might be the difference between a Cameron Dicker field goal attempt or who gets the ball last. It's amazing how these really critical momentum things can swing on the smallest thing. And in about an hour, we're going to figure out. We're going to start to see which of these things start swinging the outcome of this game. Anwar Richardson from the Cotton Bowl live in Big D. Anwar, I will let you go. I'll let you get ready for everything that will follow for the rest of the day, and I'll see you in the postgame show.
Oh yeah. By the way, I will. Serenity sent me a text message. I have probably failed her today because
you didn't wake up call.
She's on her way. She doesn't know where the media lot is. She says she's got a parking pass. She doesn't know where to go, and the traffic around this place is pretty horrific. And so then I now realize I didn't tell her where the media entrance is at the stadium. She probably will get here at kickoff. Like she easily, she gets there at 11, an hour from now. And the horrible part is there's really not good cell reception. So I literally have failed. I realize at this moment I have failed her.
Can we just chalk it up to freshman hazing? No.
Probably not. But I could I could send her a pin drop, but it's just going to tell her where the it won't help her with parking at this moment, and it won't necessarily help her know where the media entrance is. So I probably should call her.
Anwar Richardson live in the Cotton Bowl, dealing with crisis before the bowl game. Serenity, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or any of the avenues that don't hang in there, Anwar is going to try to make up for his failures at the beginning of this.
Yeah, she's never been to one. She's never been to this is her first one. She says she's been to, and you know what? So Eddie says, find a landline. This press box is so old that I'm pretty sure there's a landline phone somewhere around here. But yeah, I probably hold on. I'm gonna let's do something fun. I mean, we got time to kill, right?
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me see if I can get her.
Oh God.
Are you okay, Serenity?
Literally, where do I even start?
Okay, so wait, where are you?
I finally freaking parked, and now I'm about to walk through the gate.
Okay.
Do I just walk through the regular people gate?
Okay, so can you hear her catch, by the way?
Oh yeah, no, I can hear her. So she's parked.
You're parked.
Yes, I am parked and stressed and parked.
Okay. So
She's good.
You're good. All right. You're you just got to walk along by the side of the Cotton Bowl and ask people where the media entrance is. Huh?
Doesn't get better than this. Why would you watch Game Day, folks, when you've got Anwar and Serenity figuring? I love the fact that you were kind of hoping for chaos and that she would answer the phone and be like, I don't know where I am. So and instead she was like, she didn't know where she was, but she wasn't a damsel in distress.
All right, I'm gonna get off with this and try to see if I can help her out.
All right, Anwar Richardson live.
She's yelling at me to answer the phone. So all right. Let me get her settled, and I'll see you guys on the post game. Serenity she may not be here, but we will. She tried to call me on FaceTime. She's really. Oh boy! All right.
Anwar Richardson from the Cotton Bowl. I will take over. Oh, See, this is what they talk about when they talk about live TV, live YouTube, live streaming. I suppose that's where we are. Look, we're going to have Lance Gunn join us momentarily. I would tell my producer in the back, Michael, to go ahead and get that interview ready to go because I had a chance to speak with Lance yesterday, the former All-American and 3-time All-Southwest Conference Longhorn, and 4-0, baby, all time. And we'll talk to him about that in a little bit. Get your questions in, though. We are 45 minutes away from the top of the hour when we will sign off, when it will be kickoff. And the moment is now. It's funny. We've been going now for over 2 hours. So there's been a lot of conversation about – it feels like every element of this game. I had someone jump into the chat earlier and say, and I think it was with regards to Casey Thompson, are you talking about that again? I was like, well, yeah, man. It's hour number 3 of this pregame show. We've talked about the quarterbacks, the running backs, the offensive lines, you name it. We've talked about it. Get your questions in. I'll go through some X factors about this game before we go to our Lance Gunn interview here on the Orangebloods pregame show brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. Throwing the ball to the running backs. Is this going to be a Keelan Robinson game that we've been building up to and haven't quite had yet? I mean, it's not to say that Keelan hasn't had a good start to his Texas career and that he hasn't had a big run. I mean, it feels like there's another gear or another level of influence that he can have in the Texas offense. So much so that you wonder if they've sandbagged a little bit with Keelan Robinson. Can this be, where you want to see that guy? First of all, keep an eye on him on special teams. It was only a couple of weeks ago when Keelan Robinson was the captain of the Texas special teams. And, we know he's a threat off the edge of blocking punts. This feels like a game that type of play, I always half expect a punt to be blocked in this game. If Texas is going to be on the end of a blocking punt, you have to believe that Robinson is the guy that would get there. But I think the ability to get him into space and the ability, I want to see Keelan Robinson involved in this game in the third quarter. And I know a lot of times that it seems like when we say put Keelan Robinson in, it means to take Bijan Robinson out of the game. And it's where I feel like they've got to figure out how they do that. How can you get these two guys on the field at the same time to really – because I'm not talking about Wildcat necessarily as much as I'm talking about those are arguably two of your – look, we know Bijan's their biggest playmaker, but you can make a case that Keelan's a little bit underrated in that respect, that he just hasn't had the reps and opportunities yet to explode on the scene. It feels like a game where as the Oklahoma defense starts to get a little bit tired, when you bring Keelan Robinson in for a drive or a few plays, his speed is something that catches tired defenses completely unprepared for. It's one of the things that I'm waiting to see in this game in the second half is will we see Texas find a way to get that guy the ball at a time when the Oklahoma defense might be a little bit off? Because if they can do that, I think we could emerge from this game with his profile feeling different in this offense, and the magnitude of what he brings potentially changes today if he's a guy that they can get 8 touches to. I want to see Bijan Robinson involved more in the passing game. He's averaging 2 receptions a game. I don't know how many offensive reps Texas is going to have where I'm like, get Keelan 8 carries and get Bijan Robinson 5 catches out of the backfield, and let's see the tight ends get involved. But these are the things that I really feel like the Texas offense needs to be looking to take advantage of. I found it interesting that Josh McCuistion, when we talked to him in hour number 1 of the pregame show, mentioned that Oklahoma's linebackers have struggled with motion and they've struggled with, I think that there's a fear of those guys playing in space, how they defend motion, what do their eyes tell them, and can their brains process what they're seeing? It was interesting to hear Josh McCuistion talk about he thought the Oklahoma linebackers coming into the season were going to be a team strength, and that it hasn't materialized that way on the field during the games this season, and that's a concern area. Because if you're Texas, that's what you want this game to turn. You want this game to not be about the Oklahoma defensive line against the Texas offensive line. You would love for this game to be about Texas running backs against Oklahoma linebackers, and when Texas running backs can get to the second level. Because Texas has the dudes that when they get to the second level, they can get to the third. And it feels like that's what a big part of this game is going to be about. Can Oklahoma limit that Texas running game to 5 and 7 yard carries? Or is this going to be a game where because I've been waiting for Bijan to have the monster, right? And it wasn't, and I don't mean a week ago when it took 35 carries for him to get over 200 yards. I mean, when is he going to have one of these 250-yard games on 20 carries? And the way you get to a stat line like that is you have to have at least one monster game or one monster play. This feels like the kind of game, because of the uncertainty of that Oklahoma linebacking core. I think we're going to see at some point in this game Bijan Robinson and or Keelan Robinson but break a big run, like 50-plus yards. I have that down in my predictions. One of these Texas backs is going to break a big one. The question I have, and again, we start getting into the fine margins of what's the difference between Texas winning this game or losing this game, and vice versa for Oklahoma. It's how many big plays down the field do you get in the passing game for both of these teams? How many big plays are you getting out of your running game? And when we think about Oklahoma, I think that we don't spend enough time talking about Kennedy Brooks, who only has the 11th all-time highest yards per carry of any running back in the history of college football. I think he's tied with Reggie Bush for yards per carry, and yet we don't talk about Kennedy Brooks as a guy that can take over the game. This is a game where Kennedy Brooks has the breakout party that he's been waiting to have. Eric Gray, an all SEC running back last year at Tennessee, goes to Oklahoma. He's been an afterthought this season. He has not been a guy that has warranted all the conversation that he received during the offseason. Does that change today? Right? If Texas reporters and Texas fans are looking at the Texas offense and saying, Keelan Robinson, breakout candidate. And look, I see in the chat section, Nash Talk Texas mentions that we need not sleep on Roshan either. It's a great point. Don't sleep on Roshan. But for all the conversation about Bijan Robinson in this game, and look, deservedly so, I think anybody who's watching this show at this point obviously believes that Bijan Robinson is a difference maker of the highest magnitude. Who in this game, the secondary players, make the plays? And when I think about the Oklahoma offense and the Texas offense, there's a lot of candidates on both sides of the ball. I think when we talk about the special teams for Texas, you talk about, can Deshaun Jameson get his hands on a punt return? Because last week it seemed like TCU was daring Deshaun Jameson to return a punt for them for a lot of yards. Is Oklahoma going to take that risk? Keelan Robinson coming off the edge, trying to block a punt. We know where the big plays come from. Not so sure on the defensive side of the ball. Now, I'm assuming that we're good to go. Again, it's the Orangebloods pregame show brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. I had a chance to speak with Lance Gunn earlier in yesterday. Lance Gunn, former All-American for the Longhorns, a guy that's 4-0 in this game. My man, Lance, keeps up with the program in a big, big way. He's got some Arch Manning thoughts. I'm going to kick it to that interview right now. Michael, if you could, let's toss it to the Lance Gunn interview. Joining us right now on the Orangebloods Texas football pregame show leading into the Oklahoma game. It's a guy that knows a thing or two about beating Oklahoma. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to have him on. It's been roughly 30 years since he last, 29 years, I guess, since he last played against Oklahoma in this matchup. 4-0 all time. Peter Gardere always gets the credit. But Lance Gunn also went 4-0. He also is a Longhorn Hall of Honor inductee. He also is a former All-American and 3-time All-Southwest Conference player. Why wouldn't we have him on today to talk about some Texas OU? Lance, what does this game do for you? Because you fall into this category of no matter what in the hell has ever happened in this series,
right?
They never landed a glove on you.
Right.
And that's gotta be an awesome thing. Like, no matter how bad it's ever been.
Yeah.
Hey, every time I walked off the field, we won. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah. So obviously when I was there, so first off, good to see you again.
Yes,
when
sir.
I was there, we obviously would have liked to have won more games. But one thing we always look back on that deal is going 4-0 against the Sooners. All 4 of those games, they were ranked higher than us. A couple of them, we weren't even ranked. And many of those, they were double-digit favorites walking into that game, right? So we ended the streak. They had beat us my first year, 89. I think they had beat us 4 or 5 years in a row prior to that, right? So again, it was one of those, I think the last win we had before that was actually 83, because I think we tied in 84, and then they won the next 4 or 5 after that, right? So take a lot of pride in being one of a small group of guys from UT that's gone 4-0 against OU.
You know, when Oklahoma was beating Texas under Mac Brown, so when we go back to the Stoops, Mac Brown thing, there was always this sense that they cared more about the game, that Stoops leaned into the hatred a little more, whereas, Mac was pretty honest about, hey, the very next game counts the same as this game. So they treated it more of a business type deal. And Oklahoma treated it more personal. And it felt like that was Oklahoma guys would always say that was one of the things that allowed them to kind of do that. I'm curious, was that a thing? Did you guys what made it? Because it can't be stressed enough. Oklahoma was number 4 in 1990. And look, you guys ended up obviously being great that year. But they were number 6 the next year.
Sure.
I mean, they had you guys were like throwing them off of national championship, like potential runs. What was it? What was the secret ingredient that no matter how good they were, you guys won those games?
Yeah, no, for sure. From our perspective, we always thought that was a big game. And I think everybody that's played as Texas has always thought that's a big game. And probably came with a little chip on our shoulder being underdogs in that piece, right? For sure, right? Especially the history. I think the silver hat, there was talk about Ed Cunningham seniors, no one had ever seen that in 89, right? That had spent the last 4 years in Oklahoma. So we talked about that a lot. And again, just coming out with a lot of energy. And in each one of those games, there was something weird that happened that went in our favor, right? Obviously, you got Bubba Jackson, the fumble recovery. And then obviously, I think Padgett had a muffed punt that he picked up and ran, or bounced in his hands and ran into the end zone, right? So it was just one of those deals where something always happened that kind of triggered us in that piece, right? So it was one of those deals where we took that game seriously. It meant more to us, or as much as playing A&M, right? Believe it or not, right? That was one of those deals that, especially going into that stadium where every play, someone's cheering, right? Either it's the right side or the left side, the burnt orange end zone or the crimson end's right. There was that much energy coming into the stadium, right? So that was always a big game for us.
Talking to Lance Gunn here on the Orangebloods Texas football pregame show as Texas readies for their matchup against Oklahoma later on 11 o'clock this morning. Lance, is there a single moment from those 4 games that is your favorite moment? I mean, you won every single one of them. So they all have they're probably like kids. They all have like their own little special corner in your soul.
Yeah.
But is there one moment that stands the test of time?
Sure. 91, Jax with the fumble. So James Patton with the rip. So Mark Berry called for it. He said Mike McKenzie, I think that was the guy's name, had been carrying the ball loose pretty much all game. And he said, one of you guys need to rip it out. And literally on the next snap, James ripped it out of his hands and Jack scooped it up and scored, right? Our offense struggled that whole year. We weren't scoring a touchdown off of them, and we ended up scoring the only touchdown in that game on defense. The other thing, Catch, that year they changed the rule. That was the first year you could advance a fumble beyond the line of scrimmage. You could always advance one behind the line of scrimmage, but that was the first year you were able to advance one if it was fumbled beyond the line of scrimmage, right? Had he been tackled or he not been able to advance that ball, we might have gotten a field goal, but we weren't getting a touchdown, right? We were that bad on offense. We struggled that much that year on offense, right? So that one definitely sticks out for sure.
That one interesting because 10 years later, the Roy Williams Superman play happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
But both of those games very similar in the sense that it was, even though Oklahoma was already leading that game in 2001, it took a defensive play.
Yeah.
And interesting 10 years separating your defensive play in that game from this one. It feels like this game is due for a big defensive moment. Like in years that end in one,
right?
Big defensive things happen. I don't know. I got to go back and look at what happened in 2011, but in 91 and 2001, they were
for sure
they're remembered for the big defensive plays. Is there a Texas, if that play's made by a Texas player, is teams lacked playmakers on defense? Like that's the one thing that side of the ball lacks. Who for you makes the play in this year's game if it's the Texas defense? And they got it, and a play has to be made to win the game.
Well, you know, I got to go. It's got to be one of my DBs, right? I mean, that's the only answer that I can give, right? I think they've played well. You know, I think they've played well. I mean, the way the game's played now, as you know, is all offense all the time, right? But again, if you can hold teams to field goals and create a few turnovers here or there, right? And I think this group has tackled well for the most part. They've taken proper angles. So you can tell they're well coached. And so I wouldn't be surprised if one of our defensive guys came up with a big play this year. I matter of fact, you almost expect that at this point in time, right? This team is special, right? I don't think anybody's saying that now outside of the folks that have followed them a little bit, but there's something about Casey and there's something about Sark and there's something about the way these guys are playing this year that feel really good. Matter of fact, I'm going to the game tomorrow. I hadn't been in a long time, right? Because I hadn't felt great about it going into it for a while, but I'm going tomorrow because I think it's going to be a good turnout for Hornets fans.
Does it feel different being a former player? I mean, you know, there is something going, this program, you know, we said it with Charlie, we said it with Tom Herman. There's a lot of want to believe that there's a little something going, but you know, one of the things that stands out about Sark, everybody likes him.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's just in contrast with Tom, who seemed to kind of get off on the fact that everybody didn't like him at times, but like everybody, whether it's NFL scouts or it's other college coaches, or everybody seems to think that Sark's good at what he does and he's a good dude. And there's a little bit of like, I don't know, there's a little bit of like a rooting nature in a lot of people that want to see him do well. And it does kind of remind me of some of the things that people used to say about Mac early in his career. And obviously a lot of things happened there. As a former player, what's your sense of the program and where it is and how close it is to liftoff?
No, so certainly Sark's personality has been fantastic, right? He's had some personal struggles, hasn't hid from those. And I think that really helps him with parents, media, players, everybody, right? He's had a few stops as head coach in some pretty big spots that didn't work out maybe as well. So I think he carries those experiences with him. So I think that's good also. Man, this window right here, Catch, is huge, right? If we can figure out a way somehow to win a conference title, I think the recruiting is just going to go off the chain. I think if you win the conference this year, Arch Manning's in the bag. right? And then all of a sudden, you know as well as I do, hell, better than I do what that means. He's a rainmaker, like kind of like Chris Sims was, right? You know, Chris Sims was the guy who brought everybody else and kind of helped jumpstart that deal. So I think this next 2 months, if you will, if they can play at the level they've shown the last month, man, they got a chance to win the conference. No one's great. There's some good teams, but no one's great, right? And I throw Texas in that piece as well. But they can certainly do some things. And even on the national level, right, there's some evening out. You've got Alabama and certainly Georgia. But I don't know, Clemson's not what they were. Ohio State struck, right? So it feels like there's a window here to maybe turn this deal around and get back on the right track, right? Get back to like every year when Mac was here and we felt like we had at least a chance to get the national title. And with now 4 teams instead of just 2, and how many championships would Mac have gone to if they had 4 instead of 2? 3,
No, you're right.
4, right? I mean, so that deal works out pretty well for us if we can figure out a way to make that happen over the next month.
Lance, let me tell you what my favorite part about that answer was. Anybody who's watching this will be like, oh, Lance cares. Lance is one of us. Lance knows what's going on in recruiting. Like you just laid out the answer that everybody all week long has been thinking on Orangebloods message boards and everything else. But the fact that, you know, that you were able to throw the Arch Manning thing in there, I can tell Lance Gunn has his finger on the pulse.
Yeah, for sure. And don't forget, you got a little battle going on in College Station, right?
Oh, yeah.
And those folks are struggling, right? We got a conference move that I think, as you do, happens next year, not in 25. I don't know, right? There's a reason, right, to believe, right? So now, and you got Alabama coming. Either Alabama's in your conference next year or they're coming to your house next year. Either one works out well for us.
Lance, you got me fired up, man. Sark should have had you in front of the team today on Saturday. Last 2 things I was going to ask. 1, prediction. And 2, who do you hook up? Who's your boy tomorrow that you're hooking up with that you are experiencing this with? Who are you looking forward to seeing? Like, I would imagine that an event like this allows, I know there's Letterman events and stuff like this, but it'll be a chance, especially since last year it wasn't quite the same and you haven't been in a few years. Anybody in particular looking forward to seeing tomorrow?
Okay, so 1, I got Texas 42-28, right? And I think, obviously, I think we jump out early, right? I think we get either a special team score and or a defensive score, right? And I think we end up rolling 2 touchdown win. You know, so we're as you know, Peter is getting inducted into the Longhorn Hall of Honor next year, Gardere, right?
Yep.
So I've already been in touch. I've talked to Keith and Kerry Cash this week, Scott Gooch. So I don't think we'll hook up this week, but we've got a pretty big event planned next week in Pete's honor. So definitely looking forward to catching up with Pattons and Wattlers. And as I said, Johnny Walker, Scott Gooch, Keith and Kerry Cash, right? So Phil Brown, Butch Hadnot, right? So Adrian Walker, Chris Samuels, that whole crew.
Wow.
Yeah, looking to catch up with those guys big time. We're going to have a good time in Pete's honor next week. So
oh, man.
Looking forward to that.
That sounds like that's going to be a lot of fun. Let me say in advance, safe travels this weekend. Here's to a monumentally fun weekend, but an even better weekend next weekend, and safe travels for everybody involved. That sounds like I'm guessing Pete's going to enjoy the hell out of that, and got to be some golf involved in there somewhere along the lines. I know that's going down. Lance Gunn, again, 3-time All Southwest Conference player, former All-American, Longhorn Hall of Honor inductee. Pete gets a jacket or something. Is there like a cool club that he gets to? What do you guys? Do you have a secret handshake or something? Like what do you guys? What does he get now?
So there's a really nice trophy or plaque, I guess, that they give you, right? That's actually pretty cool, right? There's no jacket or anything like that, but there's a little, like, for lack of a better term, kind of trophy or whatever that they give you that's pretty cool. That calls out the year and everything like that. So that's good. And they didn't have it last year either, right? As you recall. So really sending in 2 classes this year. So it's going to be a scaled down event, but still pretty big for those folks. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay. scaled down. I've heard enough to know that enough good times will be held that on Monday morning when the weekend's over, nobody will be saying it was a scaled down weekend. His name is Lance Gunn. He's a legend at the school for many different reasons. But dominating this interview with recruiting knowledge might be my favorite of all. I'm going to kick it back to the studio for the pregame show, but Lance, really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. This was too much fun.
Good to see you, brother. Thanks, man.
You got it, man. Take care. Lance Gunn with a 42-. There we go. Lance Gunn with a 42-28 prediction for the Longhorns over Oklahoma. Yeah, man. Lance is one of my favorite people, former Longhorns. Still living in Austin. It was really good to catch up with him. And assuming we do more of these pregame shows during the rest of the season, I'll make sure that we reach out and talk to a number of former Longhorns or ex-Letterman, if you will. You know, I'm really mad. I'm going to have to message Quandre Diggs. We weren't able to pull that off when it looked like we were going to try to. I want to thank Josh McQuistion, though, and Mike Farrell for joining us earlier today. Guys, 20 minutes from kickoff. We're in the home stretch of the Orangebloods pregame show brought to you by the Loewy Law Firm. I want to thank everybody who's been hanging in there with us. 20 minutes till kickoff. And I'm overwhelmed almost by the stories in this game and the storylines in this game. It starts with Casey Thompson. Is this, though, the moment with Bijan Robinson where he puts himself into Texas lore? Because as good as Bijan has been, he hasn't had a moment yet. And it feels like it's only a matter of time. I want to see Bijan Robinson have a moment in this game. I want his moment to be in this game and not like Deontay Foreman's moments in 2016 were against games or against teams and games that just you barely remember all these years later. This is the stuff that people remember, and we're less than 20 minutes from the top of the hour when all of the talk can be done. All of the speculation about what's going to happen in this game will be done. Instead, we'll start looking at some results in this game. We'll go back to, and I will say this real quick. If you want to get your questions and comments in for the home stretch here, I'll take as many questions as possible in the final 20 minutes. We'll talk about whatever you want to. I feel like we've kind of gone over a number of topics. Real quick, let's go into the predictions. Before we even go into the predictions, Wildcat, how much of that are we going to see in this game? We've seen glimpses of it. There's this thought that at some point you're going to see a situation where Roschon Johnson throws the ball out of the Wildcat. Is that the day? Is this the day when that happens? You know, it feels like that's the kind of thing that we've talked about. Would we actually see something like that happen in this game? Predictions from the Orangebloods staff in alphabetical order. Wanted to get those out there in case you missed them. Serenity Douglas, who is somehow attending her first Texas OU game today. We're going to have to talk about that either in the post-game show or later on. How in the hell did she have a 4-year All-America career, 9-time All-American at Texas, and has never been to Texas OU until today? We got to find out what that's all about. She's predicting Oklahoma to beat Texas 54-48 in overtime. Also having this game in overtime, Alex Dunlap predicts Texas 33-30. Alex says, I keep going back and forth on the matchups and how things will play out. So why not just a specific predict a tie at the end of regulation? He thinks it'll be 27-27 at the end of regulation, and Texas ends up eking out a 3-point win. I also have this game in overtime. I don't know why. It just feels like this game's going to be – it feels like this game's going to be so nip and tuck that I think they're going to have to play extra football to decide it. Until Texas proves it to me, I'm going to be the bad guy. I do have Oklahoma winning this game 40-37 in overtime. I like a lot of points to be scored. I like Bijan Robinson to have a big game. I like Casey Thompson to have a big game. What concerns me most in this game is that I think Oklahoma on the defensive side of the ball has more guys that can make potentially the game-deciding play on the defensive side of the ball more than Texas. I would love to say that I think DeMarvion Overshone is going to be the guy that has that type of play today. I would love to be able to say that I think Deshaun Jameson, who might get himself a kick return for a touchdown, I'd love to think that today's a day where he gets it on the defensive side of the ball. I think Nick Bonito from Oklahoma against Christian Jones is a train wreck waiting to happen. And there's a part of me that thinks that when it happens, it has a chance to be the difference in this game. But it's not like I'm the consensus. Cole Patterson from Orangebloods.com has Texas winning this game 34-30. Anwar Richardson, who for weeks has been hinting that he was going to pick Oklahoma to win this game, he's got Oklahoma 42-35. Michael Rockman, who's producing this show right now, he's got Oklahoma winning 38-28. Michael, putting it out there, he thinks Oklahoma wins by double digits. It's not the way to climb the mod rankings, Michael. But if you're right, you'll be the only one that called that, I believe. On the other hand, Blake Skaggs has got Texas winning this game by 10 points, 41-31, and Jason Sukamel with a 31-30 win for Texas, and Ari Temkin. God, the names we have a lot of people on Orangebloods all of a sudden. Ari Temkin with Oklahoma winning 31-27. Keenan Womack with Oklahoma winning 38-24. I take it back, Michael. You're safe. It was actually Keenan. How about Keenan Robinson? Keenan Womack. Sorry, Keenan Robinson, former Texas linebacker. Keenan Womack, new guy on the Orangebloods staff, putting down the Oklahoma 2-touchdown win. Come on, Keenan. Come on, Keenan. Somebody dial up Keenan right now. And to be fair, he thinks that the combination of that Oklahoma run defense and he just thinks that defense will be the difference in that game. We shall see. For the record, the quarter, which has a 2-3 record going into this game, picks Oklahoma as well. Wow. By the way, Gerald King let me know in the chat that Mark Cuban just threw up the horns. That doesn't really surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. Mark Cuban, I have actually, I don't want to say I partied with Mark Cuban, but I was in a bar in the same area of a bar one time in Austin, downtown, when Mark Cuban was having himself a good time. He likes Austin. Doesn't surprise me at all that Mark Cuban's throwing up the hook of horns. I think Austin is in the city of Texas. Austin's his little adopted home away from home. I think it's Isaac telling me in the chat that picking the opposition is a no-no. I don't know what to tell you, Isaac. On some level, we have to look at this Texas football team. This would be, I guess I'm going into a parting comment section or two, and then we'll wrap this thing up and we'll hand you off to the TV guys as they take you into the home stretch. This is a prove-it game for Texas. They have a moment. Jason Sukamel and I talked about it earlier in the show. There are only so many of these during the course of a year that you get that can change the landscape from which you operate in. And Texas has to win one of these games. It's to win one of these games, and then it does have to sustain it. But too often in this series, Oklahoma has just treated Texas like their little baby brother that they like to bully and push around. And for me, this is a chance under the Steve Sarkisian regime to put their foot into the ground and say that history is history, the future is the future. We can only control one of those things. And beginning today, we choose to begin it with beating Oklahoma. Because if Texas can do that today, it puts this entire Longhorn program in a position where it can shoot into the stratosphere. from a recruiting standpoint, it can't be stressed enough that when Arch Manning comes to town next week for an unofficial visit while Texas is playing Oklahoma State, that game is in prime time. That game is on the national radar. The Longhorns are ranked and climbing their way towards the top 10. I know that sounds maybe far-fetched today because the Longhorns just re-entered the rankings. But if you can imagine in 8 days where they've beaten number 4 Oklahoma and number whatever Oklahoma State will be next week, but they're number 12 in one of the polls right now, suddenly you're talking about a Texas team that I think is really creeping on the edge of the top 10. The momentum in recruiting, I think at that point has a chance to go through the roof. I think you can legitimately start talking about the fact that Arch Manning to Texas the only thing keeping Arch Manning from Texas from happening is Texas being able to give Arch Manning a reason to choose Texas over the other big-time programs that are on giving him the platform to play football. Texas wins this game. They shoot themselves into the ballpark, into the stratosphere of the type of football games that Arch Manning wants to be playing in. The Longhorns heading to the SEC. Steve Sarkisian putting this team into orbit to at least a certain extent. It gives everything that this program talks about on a daily basis. It gives it an opportunity to actually take place. It's a matter of whether or not Texas can pull it off, whether or not Texas can be that team. And look, I'll be honest, I have doubt. Texas, that Arkansas game, that happened. And the TCU game, which on one hand you want to give Texas credit for winning, and on the other hand you want to point towards and say, that game wasn't as crisp. Texas, one of the things that Texas has to do today is go on the road. It's a neutral game setting. They have to go away from home and show that they can put together a complete ball game. Texas has been on the road twice this year. And in both games, the quarterback performances in both, not good. So it's just, when we look at kickoff 10 minutes away and we talk about what's on the line, it doesn't get bigger than this for Texas. There's only one of these moments all year long. Texas wins it, the world is their oyster. Texas loses it, and it's not life or death. Doesn't mean they won't get Arch Manning, but it does mean they'll be unranked next week. And it does mean they'll play Oklahoma State at 11 a.m. instead of prime time. And it does mean that the margin of error for Texas becomes smaller because suddenly they may be, with 6 games to go, 1 loss away from playing themselves out of a Big 12 championship berth. The margin for error in this game is slight. What it means long-term wise and for the immediate future of the program, it's amazing to think about the margins for which one thing can exist and one thing can't. But the moment is here. The moment is here. And it's exciting to be on the cusp of a moment. Now we wait to see what happens. Big moment for Casey Thompson. Big moment for Bijan Robinson. You could almost go player for player. It's a big moment in their tenures. I want to thank Michael Rockman and Blake Skaggs for producing the show. Shout out to Josh McQuistion and Mike Farrell and Lance Gunn. And we didn't even get to the Ari Temkin interview. Sorry about that, Ari. Thanks to Jason Sukumel. Thanks to Anwar Richardson. Thanks to Serenity Douglas, who joined the show very briefly from her phone, technically in the Cotton Bowl. It wasn't a disaster like we thought. But for now, I bid you farewell. I'll see you in the post-game show. Instead, it's time to go watch some football. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching the show. Let's go see what happens. A moment is upon us. I'll see you soon in the post-game. Later.